The History of Things podcast is brought to you by HistoryNet, publisher of 9 different historical magazines, including the Civil War Times, American History, and Military History. Visit HistoryNet.com to learn more, or follow them on social media by searching for @history_net. Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoy the show.
Are you ready?
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the History Things podcast. Very excited to be here today. I am your co-host, Pat McGuire, joined as always, broadcasting from the War Department with my Métis, because now we're pirates. We did the pirate episode,
That's true.
Matt,
We did.
with my Métis, my best Métis, author, historian, park ranger. You guys know him, Matt Borders, Matty B. How are you, bud?
Doing good, man. It's getting towards the end of the season. Not quite Maryland campaign time yet, but
But it's in the air almost.
It is in the air,
We
that's for
technically
sure.
are recording on the... Are we post? What's the actual... We don't have to give the
No,
date, but
we
are
are-
we in the middle of Second Manassas right now?
we are in the middle of second bull run. That's
All
right.
right, so we're on the way. We're on the way. It's almost our time of the year, Matt. I feel like this is like when certain people come out this time of year for pumpkin spice, but Matt and I emerge because it's almost Maryland campaign time.
That's true. It's very true.
Matt, have you got your land legs back underneath you? We spent some time on the high seas
Yes.
last month, and I personally did not want to leave. I could have stayed in real pirate land forever. Are you ready to get back on shore and do a little bit of revisiting our roots in the American Civil War?
Most definitely.
I mean, I figured you would say
We
yes
did
to
a
that.
lot this summer, and it's been a real busy summer, but I think it's time to go back, get some more.
It's time to go back. And to go back, we're going back to a guest we had on earlier this year, a friend of ours, Melissa Winn. Welcome back to the History Things podcast. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me back. I'm excited to be here and continue to talk.
We are pumped because we are excited about the story you tell about John Rawlins.
Yep.
Obviously, my stupidity in the first episode, tripping over the Grant Rawlins context of our conversation. This is a Rawlins chat. What do we say? What do you say? No Rawlins, no Grant, right?
Correct. No
All right.
Rawlins,
So
no Grant.
We're sticking
So-
to that.
Nice.
And we are going to have a conversation that focuses on Rawlins and his effect on the Vicksburg campaign and Grant during that time in 1863. But before we get into that, the reason this episode came out a little later than we were originally planning is because summer got very busy for us, both on and off mic. And off mic, Melissa, you got a really cool new gig. When we last caught up with you, you were working with Dana Schoaf, legend Dana Schoaf, over at
Correct.
HistoryNet. But now people can catch up with you with the American Battlefield Trust. Congratulations. Round of
you.
applause. Woo,
Thank
woo.
you.
Tell us a little bit about what you do for them now and how that's been going for you.
Sure. I started at the American Battlefield Trust in March. So I've been there about 6 months now, and I like it a lot. You're saving battlefields.
That's right.
a
That's
pretty
right.
awesome thing to be involved in, and it's nice to be involved in that. Of course, I love working on the magazine there as well. I love magazines. Miss my Civil War Times people, but
I know.
I love working there as well. I'm doing a lot of the sort of marketing and ad campaign stuff that we do, trying to push out some of the cool programs that we do, because the American Battlefield Trust is not just a land preservation. We buy the land and we interpret the land. So it's our tagline is sort of preserve, educate, and inspire. So
Nice. Do you do that solely like on your own, or do you do that through working with sites like the National Park Service or state entities? So
Absolutely.
partnerships and independently?
Absolutely.
Very
We have
cool.
a lot of partnerships. We work with a lot of people in the industry, the National Park Service a lot. We work, and honestly, our end goal with a lot of the land that we preserve is to get it turned over to the park system
Right.
if we can.
Cool.
Obviously, we help them out with stuff that they're not able to purchase, or take into the park yet because it's out of the boundary of the park system.
Yeah.
But we work quite closely with the National Park Service.
I still have a hard time. I think within the last year, it's been me consistently calling it the American Battlefield Trust because, like a lot of us, we've been around when this unit had a different name, and I have been for
It's had
years, like the
multiple
Civil War
names.
Trust. And people are like, "What's that?" I'm like, "Oh, right, American Battlefield Trust." But I think it's in the last year where I've consistently gotten it right. But yeah, for those of you out there who might not be familiar with, because there's still a ton of you who still think like I do, Civil War Trust. This is the same organization. It is the more encompassing because I believe you guys handle more than just Civil War sites now.
Yes.
Revolution War of 1812.
Yes, we also, about 10 years ago, started concentrating as well on Revolutionary War battlefields and War of 1812. And the name change of the organization happened in 2018 from Civil War Trust to the American Battlefield Trust.
Because obviously there's more than just the Civil War here, boys
Right.
and girls.
I was
Right.
working in D.C. at the time for American Battlefield Protection Program, which is
Okay.
the Park Service's version of American Battlefield Trust.
So like the
Right.
federal adjacent.
Exactly.
twin.
And we use quite a bit of
Yes, you do.
HTP grant money to purchase this
Yep,
land. Yes.
Exactly. And the two organizations have worked side by side for so long, but I
Yeah.
remember when the trust came to us and started to talk about breaking into other sites
Yeah.
and how to do that.
Breaking in like G. Gordon Liddy.
And, no, like how do we start working with other sites outside of Civil War? And
You
everybody
mean like
thought
getting in, like breaking
everybody-
in sounds very specific.
true. Everybody thought that was a great idea pretty much right off the bat. And
Yeah.
I remember telling my boss, I'm like, you watch, if this takes off, which I think it's gonna, they're gonna have to change their name.
You
Yeah.
heard it here
behold.
first. Matt Borders saw it in the wind, saw the change coming in the wind.
Well,
Yeah.
not all of them. I was afraid that might have to break into two different organizations, so I was
Just
glad that
Watergate
didn't
everywhere
happen.
now.
But the American Battlefield Trust.
I love the Watergate stories. I could
Well, that might be one-
definitely go down that
We're
rabbit
making the
hole.
jokes, but we
Yeah.
might have to do that on this show one day because that is
Yeah.
not only a cool story, but it's a
Oh,
historical
it's
story.
an
It is, most
amazing
definitely.
story.
We are the History Things podcast,
I
but
love Watergate.
we are going to
history.
jump back into the 19th century, though, and getting us into it. Melissa, we always hand it off to our guests, as you're familiar with where does the story begin? Since we are talking about a conversation that's already well into its happening. We're already in 1863, mid-war, right? You know,
Right.
Grant's got forces moving around this major Confederate city along the river, a stronghold city, more or less. Where does the conversation going back to Rawlins in this lens start with you?
So I think one of the neat things about Vicksburg, in terms of Rawlins and Grant especially, is a lot of the big themes about their friendship and their relationship are all brought up in the Vicksburg context, because obviously Vicksburg is not just a few days, it's not just a few weeks, it's like
Right.
9 months, you know,
it's long.
campaign. And Rawlins, of course, is a staff officer on Grant's staff. He's his chief of staff at this time. And therefore, he has to deal with a lot of the personality stuff, you know, a lot of the military aspects of things are handled by Grant and his, you know, commanding officers. Rawlins does, of course, have some stuff to do with those as well, but mostly it's the day-to-day operations, and a lot of that takes place in Vicksburg. They're not sitting there in combat all the time. They are, you know, working on strategy. They are working on, you know, personnel issues. Honestly, I mean, I kind of joke about McClernand all the time, but
I
you
love
can't
it.
talk about Vicksburg without talking about McClernand. This is where it comes to a head, and you know, that personality clash is going to, you know, bleed itself into a lot of stuff.
Well,
in
I love
Vicksburg.
drama, so I'm excited to talk about stuff like
you get
that.
Yeah.
a lot of drama with McClernand.
Absolutely.
Well,
I
you
mean,
can wade into that drama as much as you want because I am all about the tea. You can spill it
Yeah.
as much as you want.
Well, McClernand brings it upon himself. So, I mean, I honestly, with McClernand, I think, and Rawlins has a big role in this drama between these men. You know, McClernand, really his, you know, beef with Rawlins and Grant starts all the way back in Belmont, you know, in 1861. And Rawlins immediately dislikes him. He can see Grant doesn't like him either. He's a political general, and Grant doesn't like political generals.
That's right.
So the one thing about McClernand is he does get some stuff done, but he is a political general, and he's constantly aiming for his own command. And in Vicksburg is where he really, honestly, almost gets it. At one point, he's sort of gotten the ear of Lincoln, and they actually say, go ahead. I think it's October of 1862. They kind of give McClernand the okay to raise troops.
I was going to say, did he catch his ear at the Grove Farm somewhere in Western
During
Maryland?
that trip, yes,
I was going to
exactly.
say,
That could be it.
because most people don't realize, like, you've got a Western theater general in a lot of those photographs.
Just
right?
chilling there with Lincoln.
Like, what are you, boy? What are you doing? There's a war on. Get back to work.
Yeah,
Is
his work.
Is this the Arkansas Post campaign that you're leading towards with? Because it's McClernand in charge of those troops there, isn't it?
Well, in October of 1862, he's sort of allowed to raise troops. Stanton and Lincoln tell him, go ahead and raise troops. They sort of veil this attempt to give him the command, making it sound like he's going to have a command of these troops. But really, they're interested. Lincoln likes McClernand because he wants people from Illinois to, come into the war. He needs people. And so McClernand is a guy who can get people to come and enlist in the war.
They're tricking him into being a recruiter.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
And he does. He raises a lot of troops. And actually, a lot of those troops are some of the first that Grant will deploy in the Vicksburg campaign. Because he sort of gives them this authority, McClernand thinks I've gotten, the backing of Lincoln and Stanton, and they're telling me I can, do whatever I want, and I have my own command. And he starts raising troops, and Grant goes to Halleck like, "What's up?" And I think it's November of 1862, then Halleck is like, "No, you're in charge," and he gives Grant authority.
He's like, all those troops are actually yours.
Yeah, and Grant takes that opportunity to say, "Thanks for raising these troops for me. I'll take those now." And
Yoink.
So that's a real rift.
McClernand has a stroke.
Oh yeah, he's like, "What?" So that's a rift between the two of them.
That's
obviously.
a major ego crusher. Like, as all these
Absolutely.
guys are, a lot of these guys have huge egos.
Right.
It sounds like McClernand's got a massive one.
Yeah.
I'd be devastated. I've been under this assumption. I've felt this way. It has further padded my ego, and then sweep, rug comes right out. All those troops, not mine.
Yeah,
Bummer,
absolutely. Dude. And again, I think Sherman actually takes the troops and and starts to use them. And it's a little mischievous the way they do that, but nobody likes McClernand. And Rawlins has not liked McClernand since Belmont because he takes credit for the victory or the victory-ish in Belmont. Whatever victory there is there.
Right.
Even though McClernand's troops are the ones that kind of go back and start ransacking stuff there and cause the chaos that lets the Confederates come back,
Hey, let's not let facts get in the way.
Yeah,
McClernand said it was him, all right? So I'm going to go with that.
Exactly. Right. And that will be the death of him as well. His claim to...
What is that expression? Let's not let facts get in the way of a good
Good story. Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm. Well, McClernand doesn't.
No, I was like, this shoe fits right now. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Rawlins has to deal. Again, Rawlins's role, really, in a lot of matters with Grant, is this sort of conscience keeper, but also, I think I said on the last episode, Grant he can be naive. He's not naive about McClernand. McClernand is pretty transparent. But he can be, he might not come after people the way Rawlins would. And people will take advantage of Grant, again, till his dying days. The reason he has to write these memoirs at the end of his life is because people continue to swindle Grant's naivete and take advantage of his good moral character. And McClernand doesn't necessarily do that, but that's Rawlins's role in many aspects
Sure.
of the during the war, and especially during this 9-month, your strategy session, basically.
It's a huge lift. I mean, this is a big campaign.
A lot of it is just personalities, operations, strategy, that all those pieces. And Grant really shines in those avenues, but especially in military, operations as well. So he needs somebody like Rawlins to help him through some of those other aspects. And so he's on McClernand right away.
When does the conversation begin to shift, like focusing on Vicksburg? Like as the year goes from 62 to 63, it's like, it's this multi-month campaign. With Grant being in charge, there's a lot of things that he's focusing on, but at some point it has to be somebody points at a map and says, we're going here. Like when does that conversation start?
That is later, 1862, November, December time period. Again, McClernand is kind of got his eyes on Vicksburg. And so that's why he sort of bends the ear of Lincoln. Vicksburg is key. It is the key. Yeah. You've got to get Vicksburg. Some of the other cities on the rivers or whatever start to fall towards the Union, and that's good. So now it's like we've got to get Vicksburg. That's the last big stronghold, and it is about November, December of 1862. At that point, Grant has this strategy. It's the Mississippi Central Railroad strategy, where he's going to march his troops down the railroad and go in, and that does not work.
Right.
So that's sort of the first attempt that turns into, let's just throw 500 different attempts at Vicksburg.
Was that because I was going to say, was that the one he just tried to attack it straight on and it did not go well for him? So that's him coming down the rail lines at that point?
Yes, he comes down the rail lines and he's marching his men down there and, we'll take it straight on. Yeah. That does not work. And at that point, that's the end of 1862, he really does have this sort of, he's got a couple of different options here. And he's got to decide which ones he wants to do. Some of them, are basically this head-on frontal assault. After the Central Railroad doesn't work, does he just retreat back, and admit defeat, risking his job as well? Or does he find a different way? At that point, he really does kind of, I think, come up with this idea of running the gunboats.
Which is my favorite story in this whole bigger story. It's so daft. Like, I love it. It's it's cunning. And it's like, I'm trying to think because I'm a big sports guy. It's like a hidden ball trick in baseball, or it's like when you run a Fumbarooski in football, it's like, who's got the ball?
Yeah.
Like, you think this one thing's happening, these boats are slipping right under your nose, and by the time you realize it, it's done. Like, it's done.
I think that is one of the masterful parts about it. He has the Confederates guessing the whole time. Where are they going? What are they doing? Are they coming for Vicksburg or not? And he doesn't make it obvious. The other great thing about the gunboats is that's one of the other larger themes between Rawlins and Grant. Again, that kind of comes up around the Vicksburg story. There's some talk in some of the in some other accounts, other staff member accounts, that Rawlins and Wilson had been talking and sort of had this gunboat idea as well in January of 1863. And Grant had not really told anybody about his gunboat strategy or running the gunboats. So Rawlins and Wilson also have this idea. And really, I think it's mostly Wilson. They have a meeting and Wilson is somewhere else. So Rawlins has to sort of propose this idea himself about running the gunboats, and then moving the troops down south past Vicksburg and coming back up. And he proposes it, and Grant is sort of like, yeah, I was thinking that too, When the whole thing comes to success, and when Grant's memoirs are published, he does not ever mention that Rawlins said anything about running the gunboats. It's his idea. And
that makes sense because he did independently think of it.
Absolutely. Absolutely, and I think that's very true.
But how are
He
you not going to throw
probably
your boy
did.
a bone? That's like we have a theme of that happening in Grant's memoir, and I'm starting to not like it.
Yeah, it is interesting. I mean,
Say his name. It's Rawlins.
yeah, I know it's Rawlins, but that's where some of this controversy about the memoirs comes into play afterwards, because there are people who know about that conversation. They were there. They do know that Rawlins at least discussed it, and he doesn't mention it. And there are people, when the memoirs come out, that are upset that Rawlins doesn't get any credit for that. And again, that he doesn't receive but for minute mentions in the memoirs at all. And that's where a lot of really sort of a rewriting of the relationship between Rawlins and Grant, and Grant in general will happen. I think it's unfortunate, because I think some of that comes from Sylvanus Cadwallader, who was the correspondent, I think, for the Chicago Tribune at the time. He was with the camp,
Right.
and he admires Rawlins a great deal. He loves Rawlins. He actually lives with Rawlins after the war.
We should get an apartment together. is
Yep,
what he said.
he moves in with his wife and him.
Wow.
In Washington, D.C., in Georgetown. And he names his first kid after Rawlins. So he really likes Rawlins a lot, and he's
What's the
upset.
pineapple upside down?
Yeah. A lot is an understatement. So he's upset that that he's left out of these memoirs. He feels like some of Rawlins's role in Grant's life is being dismissed.
Right.
And Grant maybe did it on purpose, maybe he didn't, who knows, but he's upset about it. So when Sylvanus Cadwallader writes his own memoirs, it's scathing in spots about Grant and his drinking, and it's a sort of a very like outrageous claims
It
of
sounds
drinking.
very
and
retaliatory.
It's very retaliatory. I mean, lots of it is.
There-
And some of it has to do with Vicksburg, these claims of drinking in Vicksburg.
Right. That makes sense. There's a new book out. I think it came out this year, actually. It's a reanalysis of Grant through his memoirs. Have you heard much about that one? I saw a
No.
couple of advertisements for it. I'm curious if he dives into this controversy as well.
No, who wrote that one?
I would have to look it up for you,
Oh,
and I
I
will
would
do
like to
so
see that.
before you
Was the
leave.
author's name Matt Borders?
It was definitely not me.
It's not out of your stable.
No, because
Okay.
he's. It appears, at least by the publishers advertising for it, that he's really kind of going after Grant. So
Oh,
I'm very
interesting.
curious. Yeah, almost a counterpoint to all the Grant love that's been coming on from Chernov's
Okay.
book and everything else.
I'll tell you what,
Interesting.
I'd be careful about coming after Grant, because if he turns
Yeah.
around and comes after you, ask Bobby Lee how that one ended for
Right.
him. You know what I'm saying?
Exactly.
Well, that will be interesting. I mean, I do think Grant is human. And again, at the state of his mind at the time that he's finishing these memoirs, he's dying. He's being treated with cocaine. I mean,
Well, yeah.
he's-
So
I mean, he's dying from throat cancer,
Oh,
and he's
man.
heavily, treated
be-
with cocaine
to have
swabs
been
to the back
treated
of
with
his throat.
cocaine medicine in the 1880s. Oh
Yeah.
my.
It's,
Good times. But I had an interesting thought while you were talking about the memoir a moment ago. I wonder, because Grant, we do talk about his naivety, and he like comes in and out of it. Like at certain points, he's incredibly shrewd. A lot of times, oftentimes, I guess you could say he's got this naivety to him, and that's why he has those moments where people are taking advantage of him. But I wonder if maybe he's having a shrewd moment near the end where he understands. And maybe this thought I'm having leads into the absence of Rawlins and a lot of other people potentially is, if you're going to write this book, you have to make yourself this legend. I mean, you're the guy. You
Yeah.
can't share this with anybody. You're the guy, because the purpose of doing this is to set up your family.
yes.
And if you spread this love around, suddenly you're going to, start setting up other people's families because they'll let their books be written. That's not the point of what you're doing. But you'll also, your legend will die in a finiter amount of time. That's not a word. Don't come at me for saying that. But in a more limited capacity of time, like maybe 10 years from now, this story of Grant is less compelling because there were so many other people involved. It was less magnificent.
Right.
And maybe he was I acknowledge fully that I'm speculating, but it was a thought I was having while you were talking about it, because I'm like, he does come in and out of these shrewd, like extremely shrewd moments. And they're not always battlefield related. Sometimes they're politically, sometimes they're personally, but like
Absolutely.
he's human, right? That's the best theme.
He's human, but he is aware of his reputation, and he never mentions drinking once in his memoirs. That's on purpose.
Yeah.
So he's aware of the strategy of reputation and how to craft his legacy, and he doesn't bring up any sort of drinking anything.
Right. The book is very good at making him appear as he appeared to a lot, larger than life.
Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe that's what was going
I
on.
think
I guess was my
that's
point.
possible, because there were some people at that time who did start to, there were people saying that Rawlins had this role in some of these decisions, and claiming that. And he was already falling out of favor with some of his staff officers, like James Wilson and Charles Dana, at the time that he was dying. These people were political minded, and they did not necessarily agree with Grant's administration, his policies. They didn't necessarily agree with some of the staff appointments they had. Charles Dana wanted to, be more involved. Wilson wanted to be more involved. They sort of thought that was owed to them. And so when they are having their own issues with Grant post-war, during Grant's administration, I'm sure that Rawlins's name comes up in that vein. I mean, Rawlins's name comes up quite a bit after the memoir debacle. Between Rawlins, Dana, Savannah's Cadwalder. I mean, anybody who's left that was on Grant's staff is now disparaging Grant in a way, and it's unfortunate. I think I do think a lot of it has to do with politics, and I mean, you make yourself a politician, and people will not like you anymore. So Grant chose that in a way, but
you can ask without dropping a name a very famous Marine Corps general who was borderline the coolest person on the planet who got involved in politics, and now people just best thing to do is not talk about him, because otherwise you have to acknowledge certain things, and you're like, ah. But that's the thing, politics got involved, and suddenly the conversation became entirely different than this original place
He's
where
not
things
just
started.
General Grant anymore, who won the Union,
he's President Grant, and he's former
and
President
Grant's administration is loaded with, controversy. So
that's a conversation and a show in its own right.
I was going to say, maybe that's a
absolutely.
show we got to do, is the Grant administration, not even focus on the war fighter that he was, focus on the president.
I think that'd be fascinating, because I think he really does do a lot of
And Rawlins
great
is in that
things.
story for a time,
Just
right?
a very brief time.
But he's in it.
He is, correct. He is. He does go to war. I mean, he goes to the White House with him as his Secretary of War.
Already, he dies basically because he doesn't want to go. So he wants to hold a title, right, or something like that. Like that's what it was.
No, it's one of my favorite stories, and it's one of the things I think that really shows how much these two respected each other. It's not just Rawlins respecting his commander in chief, or whatever. It's Grant respecting Rawlins in return, and yes, when Grant wins the presidency, he's, preparing all his staff assignments. And Rawlins at this time is very ill. Again, he will die within 8 months. So he's very ill. The timing of, at that time, he's got tuberculosis. So there's this sort of idea of treatment for tuberculosis that you have to go out to dry Western air, and that will clear your lungs out. And so
that's how Doc Holliday ends up out
I
west.
was just thinking
I mean,
that.
but that is literally how he ends up out west.
It absolutely is. And that's exactly what Grant decided he was going to do with Rawlins to save his life. He's going to send him out to the west to be the, head of the Department of Arizona or something like that.
And this is right around the same time Doc's out there too, so maybe they'd have been boys.
It might
Well,
have.
Doc's a drinker, so no,
Doc's
he
a
wouldn't.
big
They
drinker.
wouldn't have been boys.
That's true.
That's
He would
right.
not have liked that at all. So he does send, I think it's Wilson, out to tell, Grant says, go tell Rawlins I'm going to make him the head of the Department of Arizona. And And he tells Rawlins that, and says, I think I should be Secretary of War. Are you kidding? I mean, he's gone with Grant to, work in the Army in the regular Army after the war as his chief of staff there as well. So he's stayed with him the whole time. And Wilson returns back to Grant and says, well, Rawlins didn't take that news so well. He thinks he should be Secretary of War, not the head of the Department of Arizona. And Grant just says, then you tell Rawlins he shall be Secretary of War.
That's right.
And I think that really shows a deep respect that these two men had for each other.
Even though the humidity of Washington's literally going to kill him.
Also, you think Grant knew he was dying?
Absolutely.
You think Grant also knew that he was like, look, give it to him.
If that's what you want.
Like, give it to him.
Yeah, I think so too.
There was some of that.
I absolutely do. He was so ill at this time. The last few months of his life, I mean, he dies in September, and
Right.
I mean, he's inaugurated in March.
Right.
So, I mean, there's just a very few months that Rawlins is actually his Secretary of War. And at just even the last few months, he's so ill, he can not really do much. And he's already been out west working on the Transcontinental Railroad, trying to save his life out there. It's not working. So I think there was a part of
Wait, is Rawlins a
knew
part
that.
of the discussion with the Transatlantic Railroad? Is he a part of the construction conversation or just its maintenance and operation after the connection? Because I love the Transcontinental Railroad story, UP-CP connection, and all like that is one of my favorite. Is Rawlins a part of that story
Rawlins
too?
is definitely a part of the Transcontinental Railroad. The genesis of it, he works with Grenville Dodge out in
Nice.
the Wyoming area.
Oh my goodness!
Working on the planning of it. There's a neat photograph actually of Grant when he decides he's going to be running for president. He goes out to he calls it a tour of the West, but really what he's doing is campaigning. But he didn't campaign at that time. It was
Right, you
not.
just went on tour.
Right, he went on tour, which is what he did. And there's a really cool picture of Grant out there with Grenville Dodge and a bunch of Gibbons out there with him. A lot of people who work on the railroad.
Yeah.
I can't remember the name of the fort right now, but he's pictured at the fort there. Rawlins stayed back in D.C. at this time because he was working on his staff at the time. But yes, Rawlins is huge in that. And in fact, one of the things that he goes out to Wyoming, he sets up in this little town to work with some of the workers on the railroad and some of the logistics of all of that. Also, the problem out there with the Transcontinental Railroad is we're treading on Native American land.
Right.
Yeah.
So really what he's out there to do is how do we fix the Indian problem
Right.
while we're trying to build the railroad on their land.
Right.
So that's one of the things that some of those forts out there actually become harbors for the people who are working on the railroad
Right.
to protect them from the Indians who are not really thrilled with the fact that they're working on a railroad on their
On their
Sure.
land.
sacred
Yeah.
soil. So
All right, well, we will come to the railroad conversation at some point in the future. It is something I have wanted to talk about for so long on this show. There's a few topics that I think go back to season 1, Matt and I, before we even launched. Like, what would we like to talk about? And I think there's a few, and I think that was one of them. Was
Sure.
for
Yeah,
sure
absolutely.
that one. And then I saw, obviously, Hell on Wheels way after it originally aired, and now I'm like doubly inspired to do this. I'm like, and now I know Rawlins is part. It's like,
Yeah.
we gotta go. We gotta do the story, man.
So they like him so much out there, they actually name a town out
Do
there.
they?
There's a Rawlins, Wyoming. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Uh-huh.
Maybe
I'm
there's a
like, I
little
am
spur line
definitely
that
got to
goes
go
to
to
it.
Rawlins, Wyoming. Yes.
Very cool.
Uh-huh. So,
All right. So getting back into Vicksburg, so they make the decision. They point to the map at a certain point. McClellan's.
yeah, and it is late 1862.
Right.
Hey, we've got to take Vicksburg. How are we going to do it?
And
And,
then-
yeah, Grant's sort of got these options, and one of them is to run the gunboats. But that's going to take some time,
Right.
And he's got all these troops down there. I don't really think that Grant was completely sold on that idea right away. He's working on a lot of canal building, and
Sure is.
in the aftermath of it, and his memoirs as well. He's
Right,
sort
he's
of
trying to bypass that little elbow in the river, right?
Right.
He's just trying to build a canal so that he doesn't get shot at while he moves all those guys.
right. He
He's
sort of
doing-
calls it a diversion for his troops, he's trying to keep them busy. And there's definitely, he was a quartermaster during the Mexican War, so he knows there's a lot of benefit to keeping your troops busy when you're in the middle of a months long operation. So but I think he actually thought some of those things were going to work.
Yeah,
he
and I
tries
think he's
a lot
playing
of stuff.
nice with the Navy too, because the Navy doesn't
Yes.
want a bunch of holes knocked in their ships either. So if we
Yes.
can bypass Vicksburg,
Well, and the first two gunboats he throws through the gauntlet, one of them literally gets shredded, comes back upside down.
At least it came back.
Yeah,
It had enough power to go the other way on the river.
well, it didn't really come back. I mean, when I
I
say
was
come
kidding.
back, I mean it got through the end of the gauntlet and it was upside down.
Yeah.
So yes, they know there's going to be a challenge to some of it. It's not just gonna be, hey, let's do it and we go.
Right.
But yeah, so I think he is working with the Navy as well. And again, he's got such a great relationship with those guys.
Right. That's
I-
Navy things out there. That's
That's
David
right.
Dixon
That's for all
Porter.
you David Dixon Porter and Dahlgren fans out there. Navy things, Navy things,
Yeah,
Navy things.
absolutely. So yes, so it's like the beginning of 1863 now. They're doing the canal building. They're doing a lot of different attempts at, how are we going to get into Vicksburg? What are we going to do? And it really is the spring of 1863 when they finally, are like, we got to run the gunboats, At one point, and this is a really cool aspect of it too. This is when some of these guys come into Grant's camp.
Okay.
Some of these big names that, like Charles Dana and James Wilson, those guys come into his camp during the Vicksburg campaign. James Wilson comes as, to help out with the engineering of all of this on the Yazoo Pass. And Charles Dana shows up in April. He's a spy. I mean, he is a spy because now when Grant is working and he's doing some stuff that got people riled up, McClernand, McClernand's starting rumors about Grant's drinking. So
Right.
this idea of Grant's drinking issue is huge in Vicksburg. It's probably bigger in the Vicksburg campaign than anywhere else throughout the war.
Right.
And it's during that Vicksburg campaign that these accusations are lobbed at him. Lincoln does not know Grant that well at this point. He's still sort of an unknown to everybody. He's the Western guy.
But he's
and
got wins under his belt, Melissa.
he
and
does.
That's
And that is the only reason why he's not relieved. Because because Lincoln goes out on a limb and says, I'm going to give this guy a chance. He's the only one who's doing anything.
Is this the whiskey and fights quote? Is that where this that
I
whole,
cannot spare this man
Yeah.
who fights.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. So
That- he
get him
does
whatever
say that,
get him
yeah.
whatever drink he's got. Get him it or
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if that's actually during Vicksburg, but it's close to that.
Right.
And he will be Lincoln will be rewarded for taking the risk.
Well, yeah,
Because
he won the war.
Right.
Even Elihu Washburn is huge in Grant's story as
Mm-hmm.
the congressman from Galena, Illinois, where Grant is from, and also where Rawlins is from. And Elihu Washburn is really the guy who keeps saving Grant's reputation in Washington when this stuff starts to happen. And even in Vicksburg, Washburn's brother is there, and he's writing back to Lincoln and to Washburn, Elihu Washburn, saying, I don't know what this guy's doing. This is a train wreck. He's a train wreck. He's got bad things to say about Grant. A lot of people don't know what to think about what Grant is doing in Vicksburg. It's a long time. It's taking too long for some people's liking, and they don't understand what his goal is. And even Sherman didn't like the plan, for most of the time, Sherman didn't like the plan until they got up on the bluffs, and then he's like, oh, wait, okay, now I see it.
Now it makes sense.
Now it makes sense.
That's
and
why
that's
you're in
not till
charge.
May. So
Yeah, we're deep
and
into
Sherman
it at that
had
point.
been, unfortunately for his troops, he'd been involved in some of the earlier failures, Chickasaw Bayou
Yeah,
being
absolutely.
a particularly dramatic one. So he's
Yes.
kind of soured on this Vicksburg
well, and
campaign.
I thought that was really interesting. I was listening to Andrew Miller, what he was talking about, that the Chickasaw Bayou fight is McClernand's men. That's Sherman with McClernand's raw troops, and so yes, he's dealing with a bunch of men who they're not,
They don't know
battle
brand new,
weary. They
right.
don't know what they're doing, and you're not even fighting on the Eastern Theater out there. It's the swamp, and so
you country club boys in the Eastern Theater with your nice green fields. You ever heard of mosquitoes and alligators? They're the same thing when you fight in the Western Theater.
There's some nasty terrain out there, and
Yeah.
Chickasaw Bayou is some of that.
Oh,
yeah, absolutely. It is. And so, yes, so there's a lot of people that are not on Grant's side during all of this. And this is really where the drinking rumors start to take ahead. Anybody who wants to lob drinking rumors at him decides to try it. One of the people that comes to help McClernand is Kuntz, I think his name is. And he had lobbed drinking rumors about, Grant earlier in the war, and now he's back, and McClernand's got a bone to pick with Grant, and Kuntz is like, let's go.
Is John Rawlins just out there like trying to Neo
He's-
like the
yeah, he's
Matrix
just
stop
like,
all
what
these
the
bullet
heck?
attacks
Yeah.
at one time?
Absolutely.
So Rawlins
It's a
is like,
lot.
what's happening? Like, red alert, red alert.
Yeah, and really one of the most famous drinking episodes, and Rawlins, return fire on it happens during this Vicksburg campaign, and it is after Grant goes on an expedition after the Yazoo Pass or whatever, and Grant, again, I think I said this on the last one, when he does have a slip or he has a drinking episode, it's always preceded by the fact that he's actually sick. A doctor has sort of prescribed something for him.
Right.
And this is one of those times where he's sick. His doctor has prescribed him wine to help with the illness. And so
Help
he
settle
has
your
some
stomach.
wine. Yeah, basically.
What are doctors right now doing? You've taken all the fun out of medicine. Now all I do is just lay around and feel terrible.
I know. I remember my husband's grandmother actually telling us, and she was she died from emphysema, although she lived a very long time, but she chain smoked forever.
Right.
And she said when she was a little girl, that the doctor, she remembered going to the doctor and the doctor saying, you just take this medicated cigarette and smoke it, and all that nice smoke will get in there and clear it out. They
Wow.
actually medicated cigarettes.
Yeah, it's like there's that meme that's like, I love 1880s doctors, where they're like, you've got ghosts in your blood. You should
yeah.
do cocaine about
Yeah,
it. Like there is not there's a not joke within that joke. Like there is.
Because it's true. That's what they did.
The guy from was it Seth Green that does not Seth Green? Who's the Seth MacFarlane that does Family Guy?
Oh, yeah.
He did that movie 1,000 Ways to Die in the West. And
Right.
at one point, the dad's got an infection. He's like, you got to get a woodpecker and then, like peck at it. So he's like holding a woodpecker on his face. You're like, that's right. At one point, they were winging it, but in the more fun capacities, medicine used to like sound like it make you have a good time. Like,
Yeah.
I need to drink some Coca-Cola.
Yeah.
I'm drinking Coca-Cola right now. The unofficial, not real sponsor. We are sponsored by HistoryNet. Your former parts there. We are sponsored by them, but
Yay.
unofficially, it's Pemberton's Boys. It's the Coca-Cola
Yeah.
people because I drink so much of it. But it sounds like I'm getting ripped off. I should have had the 1880s version. The lights in the studio. This would be a different party in here. So wine. So wine gets
Right. So he takes some wine, and Charles Dana is on the boat with him, and
like on the drinking boat or on the actual
it's
boat?
a boat they're taking up to do an expedition.
Okay,
to
I just didn't know if that was like a metaphor for he's also hammered.
Oh no, no, no. But they're on a boat and they're going up the Yazoo to check on troop numbers. There's been some reports that troop numbers are down or something that Grant's got to go investigate. So he goes and he takes Charles Dana with him, and he's sick. So There's so many different reports about what happens on this trip, but there must have been enough of a reason to believe that at this point there's been multiple people claiming that Grant has been drinking. There's been multiple people going after him. L.A. Washburn is concerned at himself. He's asking Rawlins what's happening out there. Is Grant drinking? So at this point, when this new report kind of comes back, and whether it's true or not, we'll never know. But it does sound like he probably was drunk on this expedition. Whether that's because he was drinking the wine that his doctor gave him or he continued to drink afterwards. The other thing about Grant was it did not take a lot of alcohol for him to seem inebriated or to start slurring his words. He could just have a very little amount and start to appear very drunk. So it's probably true that on this trip he does become drunk. And Rawlins is incensed. I mean, he's just livid that this has happened. He reminds Grant that he's extracted a pledge from him. You will not drink. I'll read you some of this letter. I think I did last time too, but
at any point is Grant like, in my freaking doctor, like I didn't just drink, like my doctor said drink. No, he doesn't do that at all.
I don't think so. I think
It seems like it would be the go-to, though, if you were trying to defend yourself. So I'm
That's what I
wondering
mean.
if he
It's
didn't.
like I didn't just
too.
do this on
mean,
my own volition.
Where did I put this? I did mark this letter.
Is it fair to characterize Rawlins as like a teetotaler? Like he just does not.
He does not drink
at all.
Nope.
Like
he does
zero
not drink.
booze.
There's some conflicting reports about why he does not drink as well. His father was there are reports that maybe he was an alcoholic, maybe he had drinking problems himself. Rawlins was concerned. Wilson did write a biography of Rawlins later after Rawlins dies, and in that he does also sort of mention that Rawlins was concerned about drinking, that if he drank, maybe he would be a drunk, maybe he would have a drinking problem. So he does not drink, and that's part of it. I'm not sure that his father was an alcoholic. His father was reckless. He did make bad choices, and I think we talked a little bit about it last time, where Rawlins is like 17 years old. He's the second oldest son in the family, and his dad's like, hey, we're going to California, we're going to find gold. I'm taking the oldest son. Now you're in charge of this entire family.
Yeah, you're running it here while we're
take care of your mother, your sister, and the rest of the kids. And he's like, what?
Time to be a man, son.
And he's gone for 2 years, and then he comes back with nothing. He's been gone for 2 years. He comes back with nothing. And Rawlins has had to provide for these kids, the other kids, help pay for their education, help pay for his own education, take care of his mother. So he's seen bad choices, and I think it's a gift, though, for when he meets Grant. And I think he understands that there are choices here. And the thing I think about Rawlins with Grant is he immediately can see how great Grant is. And that if you just stay away from this, you will be great. You are great. You just have to stay away from these vices. And I think, that probably does have something to do with his relationship with his dad, and this understanding that you can make good choices or make bad choices.
So when we get to 1863, then he's got to be incensed at this moment because he's felt this, he's believed this, he's seen this, and then between landing at Henry and Donaldson and now, there's been a lot of when you stay away, validation to that sort of sentiment.
Absolutely.
So he's got to be beside
and there's
himself.
people coming at him all over the place because he's not succeeding in people's eyes in Vicksburg right now, even though he kind of is.
Yeah,
but people are impatient. I mean, Lincoln too. What are you doing? Let's go. And so Rawlins knows if you just keep away from it. And again, this letter that he writes, it's like that. It says that. It's actually a very touching letter because it's like, hey, you're too good for this,
All
you know?
right.
So he says, the great solicitude I feel for the safety of this army leads me to mention what I had never hoped never again to do, the subject of your drinking. This may surprise you, for I may be, and trust I am, doing you an injustice by unfounded suspicions. But if an error, it better be on the side of this country's safety than in fear of offending a friend. I have heard that Dr. McMillan at General Sherman's a few days ago induced you, notwithstanding your pledge to me, to take a glass of wine. And today, when I found a box of wine in front of your tent and proposed to move it, which I did, I was told you had forbid its being taken away, for you intended to keep it until you entered Vicksburg, that you might have it for your friends. And tonight, when you should, because of the condition of your health, if nothing else, have been in bed, I find you where the wine bottle has just been emptied, in company with those who drink and urge you to do likewise. And the lack of your usual promptness of decision and clearness in expressing yourself in writing tended to confirm my suspicions. You have the full control of your appetite and can let drinking alone. Had you not pledged me the sincerity of your honor early last March that you would drink no more during the war, and kept that pledge during your recent campaign, you would not today have stood first in the world's history as a successful military leader. Your only salvation depends upon your strict adherence to that pledge. You cannot succeed in any other way. As I have before stated, I may be wrong in my suspicions, but if one sees that which leads him to suppose a sentinel is falling asleep on his post, it is his duty to arouse him. And if one sees that which leads him to fear the general commanding a great army is being seduced to that step which he knows will bring disgrace upon that general and defeat to his command, if he fails to sound the proper note of warning, the friends, wives, and children of those brave men whose lives he permits to remain thus imperiled will accuse him, while he lives and stands swift witness of wrath against him in the day when all shall be tried. If my suspicions are unfounded, let my friendship for you and my zeal for my country be my excuse for this letter. And if they are correctly founded, and you determine not to heed the admonitions and the prayers of this hasty note, by immediately ceasing to touch a single drop of any kind of liquor, no matter by whom asked or under what circumstances, let my immediate relief from my duty in this department be the result. I am, General, your friend, John Rawlins.
I feel like I just listened to a disappointed dad letter where
Yeah.
he's like, I also believe in you, son.
Yes.
Yeah.
And what I also was thinking is like, there was so much disappointment coming off that I think I need a drink now. It's like, was your goal to keep him away? Because I think he might be crushed. He might be crushed by that. There's a lot of power in those words.
There is,
Yeah.
and I think what's important about that letter is that not only is he addressing the problem in the room, the fact that you have this issue, you know you have this issue, you have the power to do something about said
Yes.
issue, but
the
he's
full
not
power, the full,
Yeah.
like
exactly.
that was awesome.
He's not only doing it for their friendship though. He's like, look, the country's on
Yeah.
the line.
The country's
Quit
depending on
screwing
you.
around. So yeah, I thought that was very
It's a
interesting.
very emotional
Yeah.
letter.
I think so too. And I do think it shows a very respectful approach to it. He's
Sure.
disappointed because he knows Grant is better than this. And the country is depending on Grant. It is. And he knows Grant can be the person who saves this country, who goes and wins the war. He can kind of foresee that this man is great. He's going to be a great military leader and strategist in this war, but he cannot do it if he's going to give in. I think the other thing to know is at this time, Grant is surrounded by people who are drinking. So he does have a lot of staff members that are drinking. He can be very loyal sometimes to a fault. And some of that includes some of his staff members back from Galena. He's taken people with him to the war that he trusts, including Rawlins. But there's a few other staff members as well that have stayed with him since Galena in 1861. And maybe they shouldn't be around anymore, you know. And actually, after Vicksburg, many of them do go away. Rawlins has something to do with that, but also Wilson and Dana. And, you know, they are sort of like, we got to get this guy away from these people. They're no good. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that they are drinking. And their reputation as drinkers is going back to people. When Elihu Washburn's brother is writing him, he's not just talking about Grant being a drinker, he's talking about the staff members being drinkers too. And
It's like a frat party here.
yeah, that's exactly. He says, I don't think some of them have been sober for the last 2 weeks. They haven't gone to bed sober for the last 2 weeks, you know? So you can imagine that sort of reputation is going to take Grant down too. And I think this letter also talks about that. There's rumors. Maybe I'm just addressing rumors, but these rumors have a consequence as well. And you have to address them. And in order to do that, you cannot touch liquor at all, even if a doctor's telling you to take it.
I found that interesting. Rawlins considered all levels of the playing field. Like the one of us as friends, the one where you are the great commander, the one where you have snakes in your camp.
He's a lawyer. He's masterfully lawyering him into do not do this again.
Yeah. What was Grant's reaction? Do we have an account? This is a letter, right?
This is a letter.
Are they not with each other? Can't he just walk into the tent and emotionally smack him like with his words, like in a conversation, or like a letter? They're not together in this moment. Or
they are together.
Just easier to have that
I think
conversation
he wants
via a letter.
it down on paper. I mean, there is a little bit of
He's keeping receipts. He is a lawyer.
Honestly, actually, he makes a copy of this letter, which is kind of interesting. He wants a copy of the fact that he wrote this letter and delivered it to Grant. And, you know, the one that everybody has ever seen is not Grant's copy. It's Rawlins's copy.
Interesting.
Yes, which you have to kind of wonder why he did that. I mean, I do think that Rawlins also understands the history of his role here as well. A lot of the, you know, writings that he sends to Emma, his second wife, who he meets in Vicksburg, is him kind of talking about his role as the person who has to keep Grant sober, who has to, you know, keep Grant humble, or, you know, when Grant goes to become the lieutenant general and they go back to D.C., he's sort of partying with people, and Rawlins is kind of in this letter back to Emma, like, everybody thinks he's so humble. You should see the way he's acting here, you know? I mean, he's not acting very humble today. And, you know, he does have some sense of some of these things he's putting on record as well, I think. And
it sounds like he's kind of hedging his bet in the event that Grant doesn't get it together. There's some record of Rawlins' attempts to keep the train on the tracks.
I think so, true. Absolutely. I think that's very true. And honestly, that's what he's saying in here, too, is I'm standing next to you and you're drinking. And what does it say about me as a general, me as
And
serving
chief
my
of your
country?
staff.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
If I'm allowing you to drink and allowing you to do this, and it costs the country men in the war,
Right.
the wins in the war,
Right.
the war, you know, what does it say about me as my service to this country if I'm allowing you to do this? So I can't just stand by and watch you do it. If you're a sentinel and you're asleep, I have to wake you up, you
Yep.
know?
Yep.
And so he's keenly aware of his role, and he is all in this war. I mean, Rawlins is all about, you know, I mean, again, it's his speech in Galena, you know, it's country or no country, you
Right.
know, that's the only thing there is right now. So he's all in on the war and winning it and saving this country and saving the Union. So he takes it very personally and seriously that it's his duty to keep Grant sober for that aspect as well. That's part of his service to his country.
So Grant gets this letter then and just starts crying, and the Confederates in Vicksburg can hear it. They're like, "What is that sound?" It's just a weeping Grant.
Well, I mean, to all accounts, he does seem to heed it. I mean, I don't think there are a lot of other accounts after that of him having slips.
Sure.
He does. He doesn't do anything to Rawlins. In fact, Rawlins gets promoted,
Right.
and when he does get promoted, Grant is very adamant that he's indispensable officer to him. He cannot.
Grant makes the joke. He's like, "You want to pop some champaign?"
Yeah.
He's like, "That's not funny."
Just to
Sam.
watch the vein in Rollins'
Yeah.
head.
He's like, "What are you doing with that?" And he's like, "Celebrating your promotion."
Your promotion. Cha-ching.
I'm curious, being the chief of staff for Grant, and you've commented a few times about all the names and all the people that are kind of moving in and out of the headquarters for the Army at this time. How astute is Rawlins in regard to Charles Dana? Because you've already called him a spy, and he absolutely is for the War Department. Is Rawlins hip to that?
Rawlins is genius when it comes to Charles Dana.
He knew it day one.
He knows day one Charles Dana is coming there
Nice.
to
Right
spy
on.
on them.
Nice.
And he immediately directs all the other staff, we're going to be 100% transparent with this guy, prop his tent up next to Grant's, give him a seat at the table with all of us in the headquarters staff. We're going to bring him on all of our stuff with him. He's going to be included in strategy sessions. He's in. He's one of us now.
Nice.
And that is exactly how they treat him.
Smart.
Charles Dana loves Grant. I mean, he starts writing back to Lincoln. I don't know what problem you could possibly have with this guy. He's the most honest, hardworking, earnest person I've ever met.
Dude throws a good part. They're like, "No, scratch that out. Scratch that out. Don't include that one."
Yeah, exactly. So, which is great.
That's
I mean,
a savvy
it's
move from Rawlins.
Yeah, it
it's
is.
very savvy, and it is very purposeful. He knows exactly what he's doing.
And Dana's going to be a huge boon to Grant's staff, especially later on, too.
Absolutely. I mean, he's the assistant secretary of war at that point,
I was
so,
going to
yes.
say, is Dana a useless person just other than being a spy? No, it sounds
No.
like he goes on to fulfill greater
Absolutely.
purpose.
Yeah.
Yes.
All
In
right,
many
cool.
respects.
Very
yes.
cool.
He does a lot. And he's a good person to have. I mean, I think that's one of the reasons why it's kind of sad in the post-war years after Grant is in politics and after his memoirs come out that Charles Dana is one of those people that's in the camp that's sort of upset with Grant. And he's, not on Grant's side with the memoirs. He is upset as well that Rawlins is left out of the memoirs. He's conspiring with these guys behind the scenes, Sylvanus Cadwallader especially. Why did everybody get... if you look at... I've looked at James Wilson's papers at the Library of Congress because he wrote a biography of Rawlins much later, like 20, 30 years after Rawlins dies. And he is talking in letters to some of these people, including Sylvanus Cadwallader and Charles Dana, and in these letters, it's very conspiratorial where they're actually discussing this chest of stuff that was in Rawlins's room when Rawlins died and what happened to that chest. Where did all that stuff go? And,
What's in the chat? What's in the box?
that's exactly
exactly.
what they're talking about too. What's in the box? Where, was it stuff that could, incriminate Grant and his drinking? Was it, incriminatory?
Who shot JFK?
Yeah. Who's got the chest? I mean, this
What
is
happened to
literally what's
Roswell?
in these letters. It is exactly like that. Who's got this chest? Where did it go? Did Hillier take it? All these names are going back and forth. And it's fascinating reading, but I think it's sad when you think about
course.
how tight these guys were during the war. And then you see this post-war, stuff happen. And a lot of it just has to do with power, politics, and personality. I think that's unfortunate because they really are. Grant's a good guy. I mean,
In a much more innocent lens, I think about this when I see bands that I really like that have been around for a long time that the band members aren't in that classic band, the reason we knew them. And it's like at one point, and listening to how much trash they talk about each other now, and it's like at one point in time, you guys were boys.
yeah.
Or girls,
Liked each
whatever, but
other
y'all
enough
were
to form a
friends,
band.
and you guys did something, and and a lot of people, and you all enjoyed it together for a time, and it's like, and yet here you are, despite all that, just caddy, 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 caddy.
Yes.
And it's like, that's, we're obviously talking about people who their band was being staff officers in an army
Right.
where people died. So I don't want to minimize that. But it's like, it's a similar vibe. It's like, wow, like you guys were part of something great together.
Yeah. And I mean,
And
when
it
you
seems
talk
all
about
lost.
something great, you're talking about something way greater than a band. I mean, you're
you
talking about
preserved the
saving the
Union.
Union,
Yeah,
freeing
exactly.
slaves,
You
know?
saved the
I mean,
country, guys.
yeah, changing the course of American history. And
Half our audience is furious right now because we spoke that definitively. And I don't care if you're mad about that. You're a little late to the party here on the History of the podcast. But yeah, I mean, yeah, so that's a good point. Is like that is so much bigger than just writing great records. I mean, you literally preserved this crazy experiment that was attempted in the 18th century
Right.
and still, luckily for us, ongoing right now. So it's like, dude, like, you don't remember that for a moment? It's only
Yeah.
been, what are we talking, 20, 30 years now?
yeah, I mean, Grant dies in 85, I believe.
Yeah,
so
so like
yeah,
20 years.
Yeah,
So it hasn't been that long.
absolutely. It has not been that long. No, it really has not. So I think it's a little sad to see that sort of turn of events and turn of personality. Again, I've always said I don't think there's any conspiratorial aspect in Grant towards Rawlins. I do really kind of think that at the end of his life, with the memoir issue, first of all, 20 some years have passed. I can't remember what the heck I was doing 25 years ago or whatever, but
Well,
I'm not
25
gonna.
years ago, according to Matt, was the late 19th or the late 20th century. Matt can't even. Matt, on the last episode we recorded, he let that one out, and I said immediately, do not say that ever again. The late 20th century. That was 25 years ago. Actually,
Yeah,
that was
it
the early
actually
20th,
was.
21st century. But I see what your point is. I am struggling. I'm struggling currently to remember what I eat for breakfast most days with the youngness of my kids in my house.
No,
So you add 20 years
I'm
plus all the
sure.
other life. Grant's like, I don't know. I've raised kids. I have a family. I've
Yeah,
ran
he's had a
armies. I've been the
whole life.
president. Like, what do you want? What do you want me to do?
He's gone around the world on
It's
his
like-
round the world trip. I mean, he's done quite a few things, and I think it's
But let's be real. We are asking him to remember one of the most important
Yeah, that's
people
true.
in
Nope.
all of that. Like that's what's weird. If you don't acknowledge that point, it's forgivable, the absence of Rawlins, because then it's like, well, yeah, you've lived such a life, like things fall through the cracks. Except that'd be like me forgetting Matt Borders existed at
I
this
do
point in my
agree.
life.
Yeah.
Like it's like we've done such
Right.
stuff together.
I have a
like-
twin sister, and in 20 years, I'm not going to forget to put her in my story.
Right,
you know,
exactly.
if
And it's
she's
like,
gone, you know?
dude, like so much of you is built through that guy.
Absolutely,
Like
yes.
that's what makes it weird.
Yeah, and it is. It's that whole time period. I mean, he's the person who got him into the war, and that's one of the mentions in the memoirs. He's, Rawlins is the guy who sort of inspired him to go to the war. And then, he stays with him literally till the end and into his presidency. So, yes, he's a huge aspect of his life during this time period that he is writing these memoirs. I do think there is a piece of, knowingness on Grant's part that he's not willing to share some of that military strategy with people who might think it was Rawlins, and it wasn't. I mean, I don't think Rawlins didn't have any military strategy before he came to the war. Is he smart? Yes. Did he pick some stuff up? Yeah. Maybe he did think the gunboat, come up with running the gunboats past the gauntlet.
Yeah.
Also, but Grant had the idea too. But we can sit here and say that, but the minute you put it down on paper that Rawlins had the idea also, people run with it, And I just think Grant at some level is saying, I'm not giving you guys that to go with. So
as the campaign really got going, the gunboats got ran, right? In the drinking rumors, obviously, did they go away once Grant gets this letter from Rawlins and Grant sort of is like, I got to pitch a perfect game? Like,
so
do they just fade
this
away,
is
or?
June at this point. The Yazoo issue is this letter is June 6th, I think.
Oh, it's really late in the campaign.
Yeah, so
then.
it's
Wow.
late, but he has been assaulted with,
That's why I was like, what happens? Because we're near the end. Like, I'm going to ask next
But
in a
now
minute.
he's got the gunboats passed, so he is having some successes. The reason
Right.
he's even on the Yazoo is because it's working,
Right,
So
right.
he's having some successes, and so I do think some of the rumors start to dissipate at this point, or if they are there, this is the point where Lincoln does say, don't care anymore. We're going to let him try what he's doing.
I was just going to say, maybe they don't go away. Maybe they just get drowned out by
They
the fact that it's like,
absolutely
we're
do.
moving. Like, we don't have time to talk about it. Like, things are moving now.
That is actually exactly what Lincoln does say. It's like, nope, he's doing something. I'm going to let him try it.
Right.
I'm not dismissing him. And after the Vicksburg campaign is a success, he himself thought that Grant should have tried some of these canals a little longer, or maybe stuck in one of the canals very early on in the campaign. And when Grant decides not to do it, Lincoln thinks it's a bad idea. And he, at the end of the Vicksburg campaign, in his congratulatory letter to him, says, I was wrong. I thought you should have done this. You didn't do it. And I thought you were wrong.
That letter starts with, Sam, you son of a bitch. I didn't think you were going to do it, but boy, you got
pretty
me,
much.
doggy.
Yeah. So they don't go away. I mean, the rumors, they don't go away.
Right.
But
But
more
it is a
important things
fascinating point, though, that you made, Melissa, that we don't hear a lot about them post
Yeah.
Vicksburg. Think about how many times we've heard about drinking rumors for the Overland campaign.
Yeah.
I can't think of one.
no,
Right.
no,
And that's
they're
well, 'cause at
gone
that
by then
point-
because he's winning now.
Right.
And at
Yeah.
that point, things are happening. It's almost like there are more important fish to fry than this addressing these rumors at all. Like the armies are moving.
Yes.
They're engaging. There's momentum being built.
Everybody
Like-
knows Grant now, too. Grant was an unknown entity before Vicksburg,
Right.
before the win. Even though he's got Fort Donelson, Fort Henry, he's
Shiloh.
Shiloh. He's somehow known a little bit, but still, at this point, there's a really cool, a couple of illustrations that kind of show this too. Like a drawing of him, a CDV illustration, and it just doesn't look like him. But it's him. But there's something a little off, and it's because nobody had seen him. So they don't actually have a picture of him yet. They've drawn this illustration of him off of another illustration, and then an illustration of somebody else. So it looks kind of like Grant, but not especially. His chin's wrong or
My
whatever.
favorite picture of Grant is it's like a straight on. It's not a profile. It's like a straight on shot, and it's real close up, and his hair's all kind of disheveled, and it's everybody turns it into the meme that's like, "Hey, girl, I propose to move on your works or whatever."
Immediately.
Oh my
But
gosh!
like
I have not
Grant looks
seen
super
that.
hot in it. It's like, why do you look so sexy, Grant? Stop looking so sexy right now. Because all the other ones you get, unfortunately, you get that sadness face because you could see the weight of just the life he's lived, plus the war.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the most famous shots of him are from 1864 and 5 and later.
Yeah, and he's
And
been
you can
through
see
a
all that
lot
stuff
by
in his
then.
eyes, but there's this shot, and it's got to be an 1861 or 2. It might be like a very early war photo because I think in the same series he's got his hat on. He's got
right.
one of the Hardees on.
If we're
Is it one he's got the long beard?
See, thank you. If we're going to talk about images of Grant, we have to mention that one. I do not care for the long beard. I
No,
think
well,
the
Julia
short.
did not either, and
Oh,
that is
really?
why he cut it.
Oh, see, I didn't know
She
that.
saw that picture because that's the first one he gets taken when he becomes a brigadier general.
Right.
He gets that picture taken, and then the picture of his staff too. So there's actually a staff photo.
Oh, this is the one you're talking about.
Yes,
Yeah.
that
Yeah,
one.
so that when I
Yes.
mentioned the Hardy, that's the one I was talking about. That wasn't the one that I was initially talking about. I will I'll see if I can find it while we're chatting here, but it's definitely my favorite picture of him because I think it's the one of few photos where he doesn't
yeah.
have all the crap
Okay.
of his life
I'd like
on
to
his
see
soul
it.
yet.
Yeah, that one ends up becoming an illustration in like Frank Leslie's and Harper's Weekly, and Julia sees it and is like, "Cut your beard. it's getting too
it's
scraggly."
almost squared off on the bottom.
Yeah.
And he looks much better with the cropped beard.
Yes, she agreed, and what Julia says goes. So.
Absolutely.
She is very clearly the boss. In
Yes,
that,
she
in that
clearly
house.
is.
And Grant was
Yes.
very happy for that, though.
Absolutely.
He liked
So when-
yes.
Julia
so when-
being the boss.
Yes.
When we get into the
He benefits
final
from it, too.
Yes.
flow
He does.
of the campaign of Vicksburg, things begin to, on a staff officer level, move very fast because the armies opposed are communicating now. We got Pemberton's forces like starting to ask about what, I don't know if I think, what did Ranger Andrews say? He was doing kind of the Lee thing where they weren't like saying we're talking about surrender, but like what does giving up this situation look like? And
Yeah,
then-
he's sort of skirting around the issue.
Right.
You know, hey, if I surrendered, what would you give me as
What
terms?
were your terms?
Yeah,
Yeah,
things like
and
that,
Grant's
so-
like, there are no terms.
So how much? So Rawlins has to obviously get very busy at that point, not just standing as a screen from rumor, but I mean, if the armies are communicating, you're his chief of staff. You've got your your force moved in such a way that you're going to literally take this city now. And it's not just a city of a surrendering army. You have civilians inside there. There's a lot of work in front of you. Is
Yes.
Rawlins swamped as June turns into July?
I absolutely think so. I mean, especially after the surrender. And this is kind of a cool story because after the surrender, I mean, God, they've got all of these people to parole. You know, it's a massive undertaking to get them out of Vicksburg, get into Vicksburg. So yeah, he's hugely responsible for some big things at this point, and he's the one actually who goes to D.C. to talk to Lincoln and give Lincoln the report for Vicksburg. Grant decides he's going to send Rawlins to do this because Grant's going to stay back. He's going to, take care of the stuff that's happening there with Pemberton and the, parole and all of that and setting up camp and setting up headquarters. And so he crafts this letter with Rawlins as sort of summary of what happened during the campaign of Vicksburg and sends Rawlins back to D.C. to report that to, Lincoln, Stanton. And again, I think this is in the beginning of this sort of letter where he's introducing Rawlins to Lincoln, saying, I have sent my staff officer here, to represent me. You can be assured that whatever he says is verbatim. It's the truth. I trust him, wholeheartedly to give you an accurate account of everything.
I vouch for this dude.
Yeah, he's propping Rawlins up at the same time. He's giving Rawlins this huge role in the nation, and entrusting him to go represent him to the president of the United States. And again, Grant, it's not like Grant has a long-standing relationship with Lincoln at this time. He's still relatively unknown, and a lot of stuff is counting on this. So he sends Rawlins to D.C. and Rawlins handles it masterfully. They love Rawlins. I mean, everybody who really does encounter Rawlins at this time likes him a lot. He's very forthcoming. He is transparent. He's very moral. He's not a, showboat of anything. And his goal is to win this war and to serve the country. And so that kind of shines through with Lincoln. And so Lincoln is only, endeared more towards Rawlins and Grant and what they're doing. And I think that was a really smart move on his part, to have somebody like Rawlins, who is a good speaker. I mean, again, when he spoke in Galena, he's the one that, entices Grant or inspires Grant with his words.
That's what I mean by like the shrewd, like coming in and out of the shrewd and naive stuff. It's like he's shrewd enough to recognize that Rawlins is a better ambassador to Washington than he himself is.
He is. He does know
description.
some stuff like that. Yeah, absolutely.
I love that. Well, Rawlins walks in there and is like, "You're welcome that I'm here," because that guy would handle this meeting like he handled Vicksburg.
Yeah.
You'd be hungry and it would take a long time.
Grant was a man of few words too. So he knows he doesn't want to go back there and tell stories and talk about it.
The president's like, well, what is your report, General Grant? And General Grant's like, I won.
Yeah, pretty much.
They surrendered.
They surrendered.
When does Rawlins get sent east? How immediately after the surrender?
It's only like a week. I think they work
Oh.
on that report for a week or
Got it.
something, and then he goes back.
So he's
but
able
he
to-
comes back very quickly to Vicksburg.
No doubt. Yeah. So he is able to actually be there a little bit for the celebration within the Army for the fall of Vicksburg. So he's in helping with some of those logistics, but then he's right out the door with that report. Wow. Okay.
Yeah. And actually, that's a really kind of cool story about the celebration with Vicksburg. Is Grant and Rawlins, they're both from Galena. Grant and they both kind of take part in helping raise the Lead Mine Regiment. And the Lead Mine Regiment is the one that gets to march into Vicksburg first, carries the flag. There's this illustration. I might even have brought it. Maybe not. Oh, let me see. No. There's an illustration of, the flag raising and that's the Lead Mine Regiment. And they definitely earned their spot there. But that's like a sort of homage to Grant and Rawlins as well, because they were, and McPherson is the one who says, like, let's send these guys in. These guys really, paid the price here. So they have this sort of, Galena celebration also. And that flag actually is in Galena, in the Galena Museum.
Oh, nice.
That's cool.
There.
That's very cool.
The other thing that's kind of cool about this time period for Rawlins, completely separate of Grant, but Grant, of course, is involved with everything, is when they get into Vicksburg, they take over a mansion to be their headquarters, and it's the Lum House. And the Lum family is living there at the time. Some of the other staff or Confederate staff had used it. It's a very nice mansion in the very prime spot in Vicksburg. So Grant sort of seeks it out and says, we're going to take this. And the Lum family is living there. When the Union troops come in, or officers or whatever take over, the Lum family moves to the top floor because they're Confederates.
Right.
And they're like, okay, I guess you can come and use ours. We're not leaving, though, so we're going to move to the top floor. And along with that is Emma Herba. And she is from Connecticut. She's the nanny, who tends to the family and stuff like that. And she's the go-between between that family and the officers on Grant's staff. And Grant's staff hasn't seen a woman in a while, so she starts getting flowers and candy, and people, are very, paying a lot of attention to her.
Down, boys, all of you, down.
And Rawlins is incensed because that's what he does. So Rawlins is upset about it. He goes to complain to Grant, like, these guys are acting like fools around her.
Sure.
They're officers of the United States Army. Some, other women are there too, and they're all sort of batting their eyes at the men, like, in order to leave on the carriages and stuff, the Army has taken over their horses and carriages. The Army now these officers now have to drive them, so some of the women haven't seen these, handsome officers forever either. They're like, oh, I need to go to town, and he's like, these officers are above this. They shouldn't be doing this. They shouldn't be flirting with these people. And Grant's like, you're right. Go handle it. Whatever. Stop being such a
There's a sesh.
ninny.
Stop talking to him.
Right. But Emma becomes Rawlins' second wife.
Right.
So
He was blocking everybody
he
else.
is like blocking them. He basically says, enough with all of you. She's going to only talk to me.
If anybody's going to marry her, it's going to be me.
Right.
I don't know why suddenly he's
What's
from
with the
Alabama.
twang?
Suddenly he's from Alabama.
She's from Connecticut, but yeah, so they start a romance. I mean, they really hit it off, and when he comes back from DC, they are seen, caravanning around all over the place, taking horse rides together.
So
and
did she
walks
get
on
fired
land
from the
and-
Lum family? Because obviously she is definitely a traitor to them. Because if they're Confederates and she's from Connecticut and now in love with a Union Yankee officer, were they like, yeah, you're fired?
I don't know, actually. That's a good question. I don't think so. I do actually think for a while she's still working for them, and that's why she stays in the house. She does go back to Connecticut for a while, and then many of the letters that Rawlins writes afterwards are to her, and they're very interesting. I mean, it's kind of interesting to see the personal side of John Rawlins when you know what he was like in all these contexts, because you don't hear her letters. We only have his. And it's unfortunate, but in many ways, there's a lot of people who, joke with me like, oh, you want to marry Rawlins? And I'm like, not after reading his letters. No.
He's not as sweet
I'm
as
like,
my husband
no,
is.
right. I'm like, I have no romantic interest in this person. I just think he's saved the union.
His letters all seem to start with, hey, girl.
Yeah, but honestly, many of his letters they do seem very pushy in a way that he's very eager to have her move in and take care of his 3 children who he's, left with because his wife dies. His first wife
Right.
dies of tuberculosis. Literally the day he becomes the chief of staff for Grant in 1861, she dies. And so he's now got 3 children. He's got to find something to do with them, and he brings them to his sister's house in New York. And immediately upon this romance, when Rawlins leaves to Tennessee with Grant, when they move out in October, many of these letters back are like, hey, when are you going to New York to take care of the kids? Can't wait for you to start taking care of my kids. And and you can tell that her letters back are sort of like, I'm not really sure I want to do that without you. I've
Yeah,
never
yeah.
met your children. Like maybe we could hold off.
Yeah.
Because the way that he's responding to her, it's like, I can understand your trepidations and stuff like that. And so it's really interesting to hear this personal
It's
side of
interesting to hear
him.
that dudes have just always been dudes, you know? Like,
Yeah,
Like,
he-
especially when
and
we think in
many
the
ways
negative
he
light.
is sort
yeah.
of dudeish in some of
Yeah.
these things where it's like, okay, you're being a little
Like,
pushy.
chill, bro.
And but then there's other ones where she must have said something to him that's just super romantic, and he's like, your last letter, brings out the flourish in me in my heart, and blah blah blah.
In his heart, I'm
Yeah, it's
sure.
very like flowery language back, and
It's
so-
interesting when you get into the people, not just the historical figure. Like we always talk about who certain people are on a battlefield or in a political chair,
Right.
but it's like, who are the person? Like, what are they? And it's always interesting when you see certain people being sweet or
Yeah.
dude-ish or whatever. It's just it keeps in line with the humanity of it, people being people.
Well, it's part of the story of Grant and Rawlins too, which
Right.
again is I love. I think Grant has been there through this whole thing, and when I think we talked a little bit about this last time. When Rawlins dies, he makes Grant the executor of his estate and his children. I mean, he has custody of his children, except that he's married, so his wife is obviously, inherits the children. But a few years after Rawlins dies, Emma remarries, and Grant, he's devoted to helping her raise these kids. There's letters between Emma and Grant where Emma's trying to pick out the cabinets for her new home, and Grant is helping her. So
Wow.
he's the president of the United States at this point. So he's in the minutia of Rawlins's life, even though Rawlins is gone. But he's
good.
taking this totally,
So she did make it to
duty.
New York to take care of the kids, is what I just
She
learned from
did.
you. So she did
yes.
eventually get
yeah.
there.
But eventually she remarries, and Grant takes the kids away from her. He doesn't feel that that's what Rawlins would have wanted, was for his kids to be raised. And Emma at this point is sick herself because she eventually dies from tuberculosis too. And not that much longer afterwards. He doesn't feel that she's deserving of having the kids anymore, whether it's because she's sick or that he didn't feel that might be what Rawlins wanted. Grant takes the children and gives them to the first wife's family,
Right.
and again is in their lives until the day he dies. They're getting married, they're going to school. He gets Rawlins's son an appointment at West Point. He doesn't do well there. He gets him taken out of West Point with no harm done, gets him a job somewhere else. Again, this is the president of the United States at this point, or even this might even be post-presidency when he's helping this kid. And
Quite the guy to have your back, that's for
Yeah,
sure.
it's like,
Absolutely.
especially at West Point, you're not going to get too many people balking at recommendations and suggestions and questions from Grant.
yeah.
Oh, why
Yep.
am I here? Because this guy says I can be
It's
here.
like Grant asks a question and then like looks over at his own portrait.
He's like, and that's why.
Yeah, like, oh, yes, sir.
Exactly. So
It's just a slow look down the hallway. Grant on a horse just whipping ass. And they're like, oh, yeah, we can't say no to that guy.
exactly. Yes. But again, I think that's a very touching human aspect of the story.
Right.
Between these two men who, again, like you said, they were involved in something great. And
Yeah.
it didn't stop there. Grant was very loyal. He liked people who he knew, and, he was loyal to those people who come into his circle. Vicksburg is also where Eli Parker shows up. A lot of these people who stay with him through the end, and then even after the war.
So I was getting ready to ask about kind of tying the end to the Vicksburg end. So in 1865, in the first episode we did with you, I asked, was Rawlins in the room at
Yes.
Appomattox? So yes, he was. Was Rawlins on the hillside when Grant and Pemberton have that sort of by themselves? Like, is he remotely near that? Like, when the armies are actually surrendering and accepting surrender, like, is Rawlins there for the moment physically, or is he back at staff, sort of running the show behind the scenes? Because There is.
I would not doubt that he was there. I mean, most of the people involved in it were there. I don't think when Pemberton and Grant go off to have their private conversation that anybody's with them.
It's just the two of them.
It's just the two of them. And that is savvy. I mean, that's Grant saying, hey, I can do some work here. You know, because at that point, Pemberton's not really surrendering.
No, that's what he's still trying to do. Like, he's still playing the game. Like, remember?
Yeah. If I was to surrender, what terms would you give me? And he's like, none. It's unconditional. And Pemberton's pissed.
Come on over here, John. Let's have a real conversation.
Yeah, he's like, no way. I'm not standing here to unconditionally
Right, that's
surrender.
because somebody tricked them into meeting. If I recall correctly, like neither command had directly sought each other out, but somebody sort of I think the staff officers of both sides kind of facilitated that into existence. If I remember correctly.
Well, I think they sent. Was it Bowen or somebody? Pemberton sends somebody else to discuss.
Well, that's what I mean. That's right.
Stuff with Grant.
It's a
and
Confederate
Grant's
staff
like,
officer that sets it all
like,
up.
I'm not talking to your staff officer.
That's
like,
right.
I'm Grant.
It's Pemberton's. It's Pemberton's chief of staff. I think that
Yes.
comes out there and tricks everybody into this meeting. So that's a shrewd dude. He's like, I'm so over this. I'm going to trick both armies into getting this over
and
right now.
honestly,
You know what sucks? Eating rats.
Yeah.
We're done with that.
and I mean, he was not just thinking of himself.
Right.
Everybody
Exactly.
inside Vicksburg wanted it to be over,
Right.
you know? And so if Pemberton's going to come back and say, I'm not taking unconditional surrender because of his ego,
Right.
you know, you're going to have a riot on your hands. I mean, the Confederate Army was done at that point, and they wanted it to be done. I mean, you know, nobody likes to surrender, but I think actually that Grant doesn't he sort of leak out some of this sort of information about how you guys are just going to get to go. You're not going to prison. You're not going to, going anywhere. We're going to parole you. And in an effort to sort of get the, people on board with it.
Right.
I think
that if he didn't come back and surrender and walked back to the army, his Confederate army, and said, no, there's no surrender, they'd be like, what are you talking about? They were going to let us go.
Yeah, I think they were
Go
concerned.
home.
I think they were all concerned with subjugation, imprisonment, whatever applicable term. And I think that was the moment where he's like, look, I'm capturing the city. I'm not capturing the people.
Right.
So, like, this is cool if you roll, because I'm just here to occupy Vicksburg.
Yeah, what are you going to do with all those people? I mean, I think
Right.
that was a real concern of his. It's a lot of paperwork to parole all these people, and actually Rawlins was not on board with that idea.
No, because he'd have to do all the damn paperwork.
Well,
That's-
he
of
didn't
course
mind the
wasn't.
paperwork as much as he really did think those guys are all going back and they're going to rejoin the
Rawlins
army.
can see the writing on the wall.
Yeah. And
you
the,
know what?
the parole system is about to break down in
I
large
know.
part because of this,
Yes.
and of course the USCT question. But it's still going. This will be, I think, the last major surrender
I think it
before the
is.
breakdown.
Yeah.
Yeah, and but you still have to consider that, like, decisions that suck have to be made on battlefields everywhere. And this is Grant likely considering his status of the army after this entire campaign, the logistical resources of resupplying, holding the town, plus managing that. It's like at some point,
I think he also realizes these guys are broken at this point.
Absolutely.
Many of them won't reenlist. They won't go back, but many of them do. I actually did an article about one of the soldiers. I can't remember what he was, like an Alabama regiment, I think, but and he talks about this idea of, like, they paroled us. And I was like, why would they parole us? We're just going to go back in the army. And that's exactly what he does. I mean, in the end, he dies. I mean, he's so sick after Vicksburg, and he was at Champion Hill. And, after all that, he's so sick. And, in the end, it probably doesn't hurt the Union Army at all that these men are paroled, and even the ones that do rejoin,
because my belief, Melissa, is the ones that were going to rejoin the army were going to rejoin the army before they got hungry.
Yeah.
Like those, like, I think that's this is a galvanizing moment where you're either in it or you're out, where you're like, oh, I'm done. And
I've done my part and going home.
I think the hedge was you'll have more people in that bucket. And I wonder if there's ever a way that you could even put statistics, like get some data on, like, how that played out. Like, was the bet right? Was the majority of those that walked away and able to rejoin, did they not? did the ones that rejoin, were they the minority? Like, I would love to
Yeah,
see some
no,
data
I would
on
like
that.
Yeah,
to
that
see
would
that
be
too.
really cool.
That would be interesting.
Find
I
it,
agree.
numbers junkies, for all,
Yeah.
all of you nerds out there listening to this show. Somebody
There's
get out your
somebody
calculators.
out there who's going to go
Get
look
to
it up.
counting. Don't shake your head that I said nerds. We're nerds. We're allowed to,
We're
use, like, we're
definitely
allowed to
nerds,
use the
yeah.
term. That's
We're
why I said
definitely
it.
nerds.
God.
I wonder if some of those bigger studies, like the Bears study of the Vicksburg campaign, touches on that at all.
I wouldn't be surprised if
Yeah.
it did. I mean, it's a huge piece of it, and it's the end of it. I mean, and there is debate about it. Should they have done that? I mean, is it beneficial to Grant to have let these men go? In the end, probably. I mean, and it is a lot of logistics to have to figure out what to do with all these men too.
What, 35,000 or so?
Yeah. So, like,
Well, they need to hold Vicksburg. Joe Johnston
yeah,
is
and
still
they need to
out
still
there
get
somewhere.
in there
Yeah.
and hold the city.
Well, that's what I
like, they're
mean,
more
so-
concerned about the city
Oh,
than those
it's not
guys.
somewhere. They know exactly
No,
where
I know.
Joe
That's what I
Johnston's
mean.
at.
Like, that's what I mean. It's like there is, like,
He's gone to Jackson and then went oh, shit.
yeah, that's what I
Backed
mean.
up.
At some point, there was a decision that had to. When I said it, it is, you know, there are decisions that suck. It's somewhere Grant weighed all these options and was like, the one that hurts me the least is letting these people go.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think so too. I think that's
No, I think
exactly
there's
what he
something to be
did.
said for that.
And
Absolutely.
again, and Rawlins was like, why would you do that? You know, those guys are just going to go back and join. And even with people telling him close to him, like Rawlins, don't do that, I think he does realistically look at it as this is just too much. You know, we're not here for these guys. It doesn't matter if we keep them. They're not all going to rejoin the army. They are sick and they've been starving for weeks, you know.
Sir, they're going to all rejoin the army. He
Yeah,
says,
no,
"Look
they're
'em
going
tomorrow."
home to eat. Yeah.
You've been saying that since 1862. You can't keep saying that, sir.
Still works.
Yeah, that's right. In 1864, they're like, "Oh, it actually did work. Okay, we did lick them tomorrow."
Yeah.
And I mean, that's again going back to the shrewd and naive conversation. Like, I think this is another moment where we're talking about Grant being shrewd and Rollins having obviously natural apprehension of this. You know, he sees things very definitively.
Yes.
Whereas Grant kind of ebbs and flows a little more. You know, lives
Yes.
in the color a little bit.
I wonder if Grant's looking at it from the psychological impact of 35,000-ish guys going back home after they've just been surrendered.
Yeah.
They've been eating nothing or barely anything for at least a month. What, the siege is 3 weeks, something like that?
Yeah,
Almost
yeah.
a full month.
Almost a full month, yeah.
Yeah, they're going to be broken down, like you said. They're getting back to the home front. What is that
It's
doing
even
to
more than a month because it's really after
I
the
think
22nd.
the siege starts in May.
Yeah, the end of May. So
I think it's like a near 2 months.
yeah.
That's right, because you've got the two big,
You've
yeah,
got
the
the two
19th
big
and the
nasty
22nd
attacks,
in
Right,
May, and
right.
then those don't work.
and then the siege.
So-
I mean, you
President
said it
McClellan,
real
but-
great. They're broken, Melissa. I
They
mean,
are, yeah.
So there is. I think what you're saying. That ties into the shrewd. Grant is obviously aware that he's aware of it. And in 1865, when him and Lee start writing the letters on April 7th, you know, Lee's doing a little bit of that gamesmanship, and Grant is
Yeah.
basically telling him, "Cut the crap. I know you're broken.
Yeah.
Like, I know it. Like, I can
Yep.
not only do I know it in the
Absolutely.
numbers I see, but I can
You're
see the way
hemorrhaging
they're
troops.
moving.
Yep.
Like, you're broke.
Yep.
And I'm sure in 1863, he didn't just learn that overnight 2 years later. I'm sure he saw this and was like, let them go. The ones that are going to come back, what value are they going
Yeah,
to be?
exactly.
Because they're
Yes.
galvanized in this moment, but then they're going to get back into the routine. And this all sucks. I mean,
Yeah.
I speak very cavalier and casually, but I mean, it is what it is. This is a terrible situation. They're going to remember that
Yeah.
long after this anger they have. And the majority probably go back to that data moment. The majority probably didn't go back to this fight.
Yeah, I would be interested to see that.
Yeah, I would be interested to see it too.
Again,
but
nerds, round
I
up.
think probably there's a good chunk that do not. I mean,
Yeah.
you don't starve for 4 weeks and
Plus, you got a chance to survive it. Like, if you were in the war at that point and you were alive when that moment was over, like, that's like leaving a poker table. Like, look, I'm broke, but I am alive. Like,
Yeah.
I will take
well,
it.
yeah, and the Confederacy at that point too is broken.
Oh, the big
you know,
crumbles.
I mean,
yeah, the big cracks and
you know,
crumbles are starting.
yeah, absolutely. The blockades. I mean, those are just decimating already by 1863. I mean,
So I asked
splitting
this.
of the Confederacy
Yeah.
by the capture of
So
the
I
Winn.
asked this-
and they have to know that the fall of Vicksburg is only going to make that worse.
So I was going to say, so going in reverse, when we had Scott Hartwig on the show and we were talking about Gettysburg, we asked him, you know, did they become aware of Vicksburg in the days immediately after the battle up there? As as this is all happening in Vicksburg, is Rawlins aware of the Gettysburg connection to this national moment? Like, you guys are taking Vicksburg, they are succeeding dramatically in Gettysburg, and combined, these two events are basically going to permanently tilt the scales for the rest of the war. Like, is Rawlins, does he comment on that moment
I
at
think
all?
he does actually mention it in his letters back home after the fact, So I do think they know. I mean, they must be in communication with Lincoln at this point, and have some idea of it.
Well, they definitely know in Ohio because Burnside.
I don't know that they know it July 3rd or
Right.
July 4th.
No, but
it's
like
probably,
as they're communicating through wire back to Washington, is the news coming back to them that like, hey, while you guys were rocking and rolling, Meade was rocking and rolling, and combined,
I think so.
let's
yeah.
go.
I'm sure there must be
There's a
some
really
aspect of
good
that. Yeah.
speech that Burnside gives in the Department of the Ohio, where he's talking about both events going on.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because the wires have come in on both directions, and he's letting everybody know, hey, this is the big deal. Big things are happening. This
Yeah.
is great news, and everybody, of course, goes crazy. And then the word starts to come in about Port Hudson and then Tullahoma and all that good stuff. All of this is happening that summer.
So I was just asking if Rawlins had any commentary, just because of the there's either country or no country, right? So we know how he felt about this in 1861. Here's this moment, 1863, 2 years in, the investment of time and effort and blood. There is country. And I wonder if there's
absolutely.
commentary after that, because the campaign that culminates July 4th, and then the 3 days in Gettysburg that everybody thinks is the entire goddamn war. If you think about it, a guy like Rawlins was plugged into the large scale of all of this in 1861. Well, now it's manifested into we're at the climax. In a traditional sense, pinnacle, peak, whatever you want. We're at this major moment in the middle of things, all things considered, that validates the country or no country speech. Does he have anything to say, like even in a quick aside? Like, is there any sort of commentary from him about this moment? Like, other than just like, obviously this was huge. Like,
I'm not sure. I mean, I do know that a lot of the voice that we get from Rawlins is from his letters after this.
All right.
And it and much of that is, back home to Emma,
who did finally make it to New York.
Who did finally make it to New York, yes. And does take care of those kids for a long time.
Yeah, I can't let a bit go, Matt. You know how this works.
I
We've
know.
been doing this for years.
Yes. So, and you can see that he has a much better understanding of their importance, because you have to understand too that before this, they were relatively unknown. I mean, Grant and Rawlins, they're just like the Western guys, you know, they're making stuff happen and they're doing some big stuff, but they're not the big players that they are on the scene right now. And this is when that changes. Vicksburg happens. He's going to visit the president, you know, I mean, he knows this is where it changes. Now we're in the big leagues. And to be honest, that's going to hurt Rawlins in the end, because the bigger Grant gets, he's got to get bigger players on board with him too. And so when you get into the Overland Campaign, and there's a point in time when Rawlins takes a leave of absence in 1864 because he's very sick at this point. He is starting to show signs of the tuberculosis, and he's starting to write back home about his chest and how he's sick and stuff like that. So he does take a leave of absence around that time. I think it's 64. And when he comes back, Grant is bigger than that general who left Galena. And so he has some real big players in his, that he's talking to now. He's talking to Secretary of War all the time. He's not just occasionally like he was in Vicksburg, or...
Plus, he's got different command structure he has to interact with, because Grant is not the Army of the Potomac commander. He's got Meade he's also now got to do. He's got this whole different command
with
dynamic.
All that. Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, there are actually some... reports and letters where Rawlins is sort of kind of talking about how he's left out of some conversations now, and he's There's some stuff that's happening. And again, I do actually think most of that is Grant kind of taking care of Rawlins. I mean, I think
Sure.
Grant has a sort of fatherly approach, or at least big brotherly approach to Rawlins. And
Well, if his constitution's wrecked by
yeah,
tuberculosis,
he's really sick. I mean, and so I do think that some of it is, even when Rawlins comes back from these leave or right before he goes on leave, he's in bed for days sometimes. And so he's left out of conversations and stuff, and that's sort of his complaint about it. But it's like, I mean,
War
I think
can't
it's really
stop.
just people, taking care of you. And, but, if you've been in the center of it all and then you're not anymore, it feels that way.
So before we wind things down and give you the final word on Rawlins before we leave him for a while, I do want to ask about a few things relative to the Overland campaign, even though we're not going to get into the campaign itself. One, I wonder, is there... So I'll just say it. I'll stop trying to think poetically. So Gods and Generals, the book. Not Gods and Generals, the book. Last Full Measure,
Full
the
Measure.
book. I think features Rawlins as one of the people they follow, at least from chapter to chapter here and there.
Right.
And I know that a lot of the way Shara writes is he obviously, has to create a historical fictional series of dialogues here and there. There's a few times where he creates these seemingly very tense exchanges between him, Rawlins, and Meade. Is that a contentious relationship between the two of them, as Meade is also navigating the same new dynamic they're all in together? Because obviously Meade not thrilled to have his boss looking over his shoulder. Grant doing his best to try to be like, I'm not actually looking over your shoulder while I'm directly looking over your shoulder. And then, obviously Rawlins is the screen.
Right.
If he was a wrestler, he'd be like, John the Screen Rawlins. But is there any sort of friction, headbutting, interact? Is there an interesting relationship between those two just by default in 1864 because of how close they both are to Grant at the same time?
I don't know too much about it, but I don't really think so.
Because my follow-up is, does Shara do a good job bringing Rawlins to life?
Really what he's doing is showing Rawlins' character more so than anything, because obviously these are two people with big tempers.
Right.
And I think he's trying to show that they both have tempers. I don't think there's as much animosity between Grant and Meade as people think.
I would agree with
I
that.
would agree with that too.
It's their staffs that don't like
I
And
each
I
other.
think it's
so,
also
too.
the initial moment that they're all coming together that's really awkward. And it's because everybody's just getting used to the dynamic.
Sure.
I don't think it's beef in the way people say it's beef. I think it's just, what is happening? As all this comes, am I in charge? Are you in charge? I know you're rank, you're in charge, you're lieutenant general,
and
but
exactly.
am I running the army while you're here? That's confusing.
Yeah.
But I think Grant does a really good job of trying to still empower Meade to be Meade and be the leader of the Army of the Potomac. At the same time, Grant's a commander. He's got troops around him, and the troops are looking to him to be their commander as well. So there's some of that that's just going to inherently bleed into each other and be completely, unbreakable.
You get a lot of A personalities in one spot, and
Yeah.
it gets hot.
But I think that they do a good job of trying to allow it. I think Grant actually really respects Meade quite a bit, and there are many things, and especially on their initial, meeting, is Meade sort of comes in and says, the army's yours, and he's like, no, I don't want the army. I'm here to lead the whole army. I'm just following you guys. And he
to stay the heck
says,
out of Washington.
yeah, that exactly. He knows Grant knows his purview is much larger than just the Army of the Potomac.
Right.
And actually, that's one of the interesting things that happens after Rawlins goes to D.C. Lincoln's already sort of feeling out Grant to see if he could go take over the Army of the Potomac.
Right.
And he's like, finally, somebody's winning some stuff. And he's talking to Rawlins about should he go lead the Army of the Potomac? And Rawlins is kind of like, I don't think Grant wants that. This is his army. He doesn't want to go to the east. And he actually tells Charles Dana, he doesn't want that. And he does, and this is another crafty Grant move where he does it in a way that Dana tells Lincoln,
Right.
do not put Grant in charge of the Army of the Potomac. He doesn't want that right now.
So I find that fascinating because we are big fans of George Meade on this show. We do a fair amount of lifting him up, via Fredericksburg, obviously. I go to war over where the hell is John Reynolds, at Fredericksburg. You should have been there for Meade when he needed you, bud. And then obviously at Gettysburg, he's the guy.
Right.
I take tons of fun shots at, trying to make sure people understand there's more to the fight and the war than just Gettysburg. But let's be real, he's the commanding general of the Union Army that wins that momentous battle. And
he's got some chinks in what's going on there,
we
too.
always say there's a reason, though, that he keeps the job for the rest of the war, right? There's a reason that a bunch of big names, McClellans, Hookers, Burnsides, there's a bunch of guys that sit in that chair, but he keeps it for longer than anybody. But it's interesting that right after Vicksburg, Gettysburg, Lincoln is still considering the seat at the head of the Army of the Potomac, and then finds a way to get the best of both worlds because he gets to keep he gets to keep Meade without having to have that whole replacement fiasco.
Right.
Meade's reputation stays intact, thus his ego stays intact a fair amount, and he continues to be a snapping turtle who fights. But also, he gets his Grant out here kind of, quote unquote, not in command of the Army of the Potomac, but I'm just going to hang around and be in command without being in command. And it's like, this is an interesting moment to consider. I never really was aware that Lincoln was even considering Meade's position.
Big a role the Eastern Theater plays in the eyes of Lincoln, the politicians, and he knows the country.
Right.
So I think that's the only reason he's even considering it.
Sure.
Grant's winning. He just won this stuff. I mean, Meade just won too. I mean, this is a week
that's
or
why
two
I'm super
afterwards.
interested. It's like, wow. It's like I totally get the Grant argument.
But he knows he's got to win the Eastern Theater, and he is upset that Meade didn't chase Lee after Gettysburg. I mean, he's upset about that. So, But he
kind of does. I mean, we won't get into that. We did that with Scott Harwig. I mean, I think I asked Scott the same question. I'm like, because Elijah Hunt Rhodes literally is writing about how his unit almost caught them.
I mean, they did.
I mean, they
got very
close.
Yeah.
They really did. They tried. I mean, I
guess it just depends
sleep.
on who you're listening to. That'll tell you. He moved. He didn't move. Right? Because McClellan didn't move unless you read Matt Borders. And then Matt Borders will tell you McClellan definitely moved in September and October 1862. He damn sure did.
He did, yes.
Oh, man.
Yeah, but I mean, so I think that, if you look at 1863 and see why Lincoln likes Grant so much, just look at all this stuff that's happening. I mean, there have been multiple people in the Army of the Potomac. Hooker just gave away Chancellorsville, I mean, literally while this is happening in Vicksburg, I'm just going to give up the high ground, and it's like, what'd you do that for? And, there's nothing good coming out of there. And then obviously Gettysburg is good, but that's right at the end. That's right at the end of Vicksburg, so he's got 3 days basically of
Grant's resume
hooray.
exists in 61, 62, and 63. And you can make this argument for Meade to a degree, because I obviously cite Fredericksburg, and that is a 62. But Grant's as the war evolves into different phases, eras, seasons, however you want to describe it, the atmosphere of the war in its various moments.
Yeah.
Grant's got wins in different atmospheres of the war.
Well, in higher position too. I mean, Meade's got wins and he's got good service earlier in the war, but he's like brigade and divisional and corps commander.
He's division when he breaks through Jackson's lines, right?
Correct.
Right, because him and Birney are yelling at each other and they're all looking for John Reynolds.
What Grant has is a track record of always going forward, too.
Right.
Never going back. He never goes back. And even when Vicksburg isn't working, he's going forward. He's continuing to try. It's taking 9 months, but he is doing everything he can to make it work. These other generals, it's not even necessarily their fault. They don't really even have enough time to show that they could do what Grant is doing because they haven't been in charge for 3 years.
I also wonder if Grant had been in the East earlier in the war, if he'd been afforded the luxury of doing the things that he does.
Absolutely, I think so too. I think that's very true.
Because in the West, you're out of sight, out of mind, and the importance of the two theaters, like obviously the East is way more symbolically, and we can get into that conversation different, but I'm just going to say it like more important.
No, I think that's true. And I think Lincoln makes some of these moves because they're political shows. I've taken out, I'm taking McClellan out and I'm putting Burnside in, or whatever. I'm taking out Hooker, and I'm moving my chess pieces around.
This is kind
He
of
doesn't have to
piquing
do that in the Western theater because the public isn't paying attention.
This is kind of piquing my interest in the political conversation surrounding 1864 a lot more, because I wonder if it's like Lincoln realizing it's like with the elections looming, like we need to fight.
Yep.
Like
Yeah.
we need to fight. Like we need to stop playing politic war. Like we need to fight this war. And maybe that's been the ace in his up his sleeve, his back pocket the entire time, is he's got this dude in the West that just fights and fights and fights and fights and fights. And then you get to the summer, of 1863, which is really the beginning of the 1864 election season conversation.
Yep.
I mean, it's obviously a year and a half away,
No, I'll
but
grant you that.
it
I think
begins.
I
But
think it's a
like,
good point.
I wonder if Lincoln in that moment is like, all right, we can't play politics right now. We need people who win. So maybe that's
Yeah.
why we got to bring Grant over.
Absolutely. I mean, then he sends Grant out to help Rosecrans. I mean,
Right.
he's like, I got to get Grant over there. I got to get Grant over there. I got to get people fixing stuff.
Yes. So I
and
wonder,
Grant's the one that's doing it. So
I'm
because he
more
doesn't
peeked
go
into
take
this
over
now.
the army. He doesn't go to be with Meade until 1864. So now he's going to fix some stuff out in Tennessee.
When does he come to the
and-
top secret site, Matt?
Oh, August of 64.
Oh, it's that
Yeah.
late.
Yeah,
Okay, it's after the
August
battle.
4 through 6.
All right, so I couldn't remember if it was before or after the battle where he fires the bejesus out of David Hunter.
Offers him a department command is how that works.
I think I say this every time we talk about this. I always imagine that David Hunter hadn't even let the door out of his hand when he walked in, and he was already told he was fired.
So I heard you guys talking about that on the Andrew Miller one, and I was thinking the McPherson firing is funny too.
Is it?
It's very funny.
I'm unfamiliar. Do you want to tell me
not
the story?
McPherson. I mean McClernand. So
Okay.
McClernand, obviously he's, this is a good way too, like McClernand. He's.
Andrew defended McClernand more than I
no,
thought he would,
I
too.
know,
I was surprised by that.
But I think it's true. I mean, McClernand does do some stuff.
Yeah.
He's not like some of the political generals. He does actually have some successes, in some ways. He raises those troops. I mean, he really does have a way of commanding troops. So, but he's and I did
Loser,
like what Andrew
to
was
say,
saying too,
Melissa.
is
I'm
that
just
if he would
kidding.
have just stayed a military person, he probably would have gotten all the stuff he wanted. But he had to be a slimy politician guy who wanted more than he deserved at the time. So, so when he slips up, and goes to the press after the 22nd and sort of, congratulates himself, and that gets in the press, and now he's been insubordinate. So he knows that Grant has not told anybody that he's gotten the authority to get rid of McClernand. He sends Charles Dana at 2:00 in the morning
Damn.
to his tent
Like
to
wakes him
relieve
up.
him. Yeah. And McClernand knows it's coming. McClernand is sitting awake in his tent,
Wow.
in the chair. His sword is on a table, and he's ready to surrender. So he knows it's coming.
That went from like I was expecting to be very excited about this savage moment to like I'm now sad. There's like a weird sadness to that. It's like accepting it and like, oh, you took all the fun out of it. Now I feel bad for you. Damn.
Well, it's still fun.
It's still
No, I
fun.
know,
It's
but
O'clock
like
in the morning, but-
you have sullied this for me a little bit, and now I'm upset in a way I didn't expect to be. Like, damn you, McClernand. That's why you're getting fired. You can't just go with the plan. Even the plan to fire you, you got to mess it up.
Yeah, that's true. I do like that Grant decided. He's like, wait until 2:00 in the morning before you go over there and tell him he's gone. Like that. He did that on purpose, and
Yeah.
you gotta laugh at that.
That's savage. I
Sort of
definitely.
sense
All right.
of humor from Grant.
So as we we move into other stories relating to Grant and Rawlins and 64 and 5 and presidencies, we'll save those for other days. How do we I'll give you the ability to answer this, or the opportunity to answer this in however you want, but I'll ask you this in two phases. How do we end the conversation relative to Vicksburg? And then how do we walk away from Rawlins and Grant until we come back to say maybe do an episode about Overland or focus on the presidency? Where do we leave Rawlins with you today, Melissa Winn?
Well, I would say again, kind of how it starts, Vicksburg is really exactly where it is with Rawlins and Grant. It's the genesis of many of the stories that, continue on between Grant and Rawlins. It's the genesis of the memoir fight, it's it's 9 months of living, the whole Vicksburg campaign. It's the other side of the war. It's not the combat. It's not the actual military operations. It's all the other aspects of the war that come into play. I do remember the first time I ever was reading about, some of the stuff with Grant in the war, and the first time I heard about McClernand, and the first time I heard about his dad, coming, and again, this is General Orders number 11 too. All that, I was like, geez, the human side of what you have to deal with during the war is more frustrating than people shooting at you. Yeah. And I think that was probably true for Grant. And I think Rawlins is a huge benefit to him because he takes care of so much of it. And you see that in so many aspects here during the Vicksburg campaign. And that's why he stays with him forever. I mean, that's why this is their friendship, and it is forged here in a way. That letter is like, look, I'm with you to the end if you can be who you are meant to be, because I'm so much your friend that I am telling you the honest truth, and that all happens during the Vicksburg campaign because you've got this, chunk of time during the war where you're not fighting battles, you're strategizing, you're doing a siege. I mean, these are not combat operations. So many people think so much about, the battles and the fighting and the, casualties. And this is the whole other aspect of the war that I find fascinating and has so much impact on whether you win or not.
I definitely find what you're saying to be one of the things I'm most interested in when I study military history right now. Is I think I have found that unless you were engaged in one of these very rare moments in warfare where it is more than 24 hours of continuous fighting, like at some point, even on the front lines of World War I trenches, what's happening in Ukraine right now, what happened when the first war that ever happened in time and space way back when happened, at some point, everybody ends up with a few minutes alone with themselves.
Yes.
And I wonder what those moments are like. But for 9 months with Grant and Rawlins, we got to see a good bit of that. We got to see that, the not bombs exploding in the air over our heads, the bullets whizzing past us. We got to see these moments of humility and success and sobriety and failure and all these things wrapped up into one administrative chaos, because we're also talking about administering the army, and it's just one of these things I think about is like, even in these completely alien, unnatural, uncomfortable situations like warfare, I wonder what people's humanity are like when they get these private moments to self. Like, what are they thinking? How are they thinking? How are they expressing those thoughts? Like this letter. I was also thinking, thank God that he made this litigious copy of it, the lawyer and him, because is there any record of what happens to Grant's copy of the letter?
Yeah, no.
So without this copy being made, we never know that letter ever gets written.
Right.
Because are there any other references to the letter other than the letter itself? Like nobody says, hey, Rawlins wrote him a letter, and all these things are so important to illustrating, obviously illustrating this story specific, Rawlins Grant, but it's also illustrating the overall fact that humanity perpetrated all of this.
Yes.
They didn't just suddenly appear as armies and suddenly were supplied and suddenly shot the bejesus out of each other. People had to do all these things, and and it's a much bigger narrative that we have tried to sort of keep accidentally thematically on this podcast, is the humanity, the people being people.
Yeah, and I think people sometimes think when you start to put the humanity in, you break down the heroism of people, but I actually think it adds to it. Again, I think
those people are shallow thinkers, and I'll say that boldly, because I think if you're afraid of your hero being fallible, then they're not really a hero. They're a symbol.
Right.
And symbols,
an icon.
Symbols
But,
and icons can be bastardized and perverted and manipulated in lots of things, but like heroes to me are infallible. And when I see hero, they are everything that we have talked about. They are success, they are failure, they are triumph, they are tragedy, they are all of those things. And that's why when you in episode 1 sort of talked about the real theme of Grant and then Grant and Rawlins is this like lifelong battle with himself.
Yeah.
And how Rawlins was this major influence on that battle. Like that was such a, honestly, personally, and I'll say this very real, like the caricature of me that usually sits behind this microphone is very big, but like I struggle with myself all the time. And like having people like Matt Borders in my life are incredibly important to me.
Yep.
It's not just the obvious ones like my wife, but like just having a friend who I'm not married to.
Right.
Like there is no filter of obligation between Matt and I, and Matt is very honest with me, and that has shaped me professionally, personally,
Yep.
And it helps me connect to this Grant and Rawlins experience a lot more because I'm like, I can relate to that. I sit across the table from a dude who, when I fly off the handle about things, is like, hey, boots on the ground, buddy, and things like that. And there's a super real thing that everybody out there that can hear my voice right now, I guarantee you've been there. Maybe not as crazy and Neil Armstrong off the moon like me, but like I imagine there's been a point where you have come off some rails somewhere and somebody else has grounded you, and maybe some of you are lucky enough to have a lifelong mate to kind of hang on to you and keep you around, and maybe you're also able to be that for somebody else. But that's I think one of my favorite points.
Yep.
I made up 2 words right there.
That's all right.
Of the Rawlins story, and again,
too.
I apologize for tripping over the intro of episode 1 and just being like Grant, and you were like Rawlins. But I'm glad that we got
that's
to.
okay.
Well, I'm glad we kind of got to highlight that in a really ridiculous way at my expense. It's like we're here to talk about Rawlins and this influence and impact on one of the most mega people that we have in our nation's history, and almost nobody knows Rawlins.
Yeah.
But he's such a big part of the story.
Yep, absolutely.
Also, shout out to you for taking selfies in Rawlins Circle every time you're down there. Like, every time you're down there. You're like, I couldn't even come within 100 miles of this place.
It's not every time, because
No?
I literally drive by it every day when I go to work.
Oh, so it's not every time.
I drive by every morning and say, good
We
morning,
get
General.
365 consecutive pictures. Well, this has been incredible.
But whenever I can get out of the car, I do to say hello.
So obviously keep following along with the work Melissa does with the Battlefield Trust by following American Battlefield Trust on all of their social media. I'm not going to plug it individually. They're a major organization. Follow them.
Yeah, battlefields.org.
Just put them in your web
one.
search bar. Put them in your social media search bars. You're going to find them. And they are out there obviously doing the good work for preservation, education, and inspiration. Melissa, obviously we did appreciate and continue to appreciate your past works with HistoryNet, who are our lovely sponsors here. Shout out to Dana, running all those publications.
Yeah.
Is Dana by himself now that you left? Is it just like Dana and he's like, it's like, I imagine Dana's got all these fingers in his ship. He's like, I got to do this
He
magazine.
does
that
have
magazine.
a lot more to do.
Well, Dana's the
Unfortunate.
man. He's the superhero, and he can do
is,
the work.
yes.
So, if you're looking for what's happening ahead on the History Things podcast, there's a lot coming up. You've been hanging out, obviously, on the high seas with Matt and I as we ended August. We just went through this monster Pennsylvania Reserves episode with Eric Money. So hopefully some of you remember that I am... Hopefully you remember that I am important and cool, because Eric shreds me like 3 or 4 times in that episode, and I got to maintain my street cred. It's my show, it's Matt's show, and Eric kind of just dominated me. But that was one of the best. By the way, do you know a lot about the Pennsylvania Reserves? Because if not, you got to tune in, Melissa, to the Eric episode.
Oh, I definitely will. I love the
I don't
Pennsylvania
think there's
Reserves.
a single person working professionally that knows more about them than Eric does.
That
It was
sounds really
crazy.
interesting.
We like
I
thorough
like their
storytellers.
story, yeah.
And back to back, and now back with you, there'll be 3, it's like triple homers in a row. We will have released episodes with very thorough people. Kevin Duffus and Eric Money, and now once again with Melissa Winn. But Melissa, you have a baseball story for us? I'm never against the baseball story.
I heard that you like baseball, so I was
it.
like,
He
I'm bringing a
loves
baseball
Let's
story.
go, because the Yankees suck this year, so I need good baseball stories, because mine are all bad.
I should bring my son on the show because he is mega
I'm
baseball
down.
history.
Open
but-
invitation. Let's talk baseball.
Okay, he would definitely talk baseball with you.
All right.
He loves that. Well, I shouldn't plug another podcast, but
You can plug a podcast as
baseball
long as...
is dead.
Oh, you can definitely plug them.
Oh
I was
my
going to say, you
gosh.
can't plug podcasts that directly compete with us, which is every
Yeah.
historical podcast. Remember, we're the world champs.
Yes.
No, I'm just kidding. So what's the name of that podcast? The baseball one?
Baseball is dead.
Baseball is dead?
Yes.
All right, I've never heard of it. Now I got to
It's
check
pretty
it
good,
out.
actually. I'm not really a baseball person, and I've listened to it multiple times with him. So
All right. Well, I'm in. I'm going to check it out.
you should definitely check it out.
There'll be
but-
follow-up on that in December. I'll let you know how it went.
Okay,
Go for it.
definitely. So I brought a Civil War baseball story. I'll just read it because
Yeah, go for it.
I'll mess it up. But it is the Iron Brigade and baseball.
Oh, Matt, right up your alley.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, so play ball, the Iron Brigade commander, and Milwaukee baseball. Also, I'm from Milwaukee, so on Wisconsin.
There you go.
Okay.
On November 20th, 1859, Milwaukee, Wisconsin's first ever game of baseball was played by 2 teams of 7 at the Milwaukee Fairground. The game was organized by Rufus King, then publisher
Hey.
of the Milwaukee Sentinel and later a general in the Union Army. King helped raise the famous Iron Brigade, which was originally called King's Wisconsin Brigade and consisted of the 2nd, 6th, 7th Wisconsin regiments and the 19th Indiana Infantry, later the 24th Michigan.
Later, the 24th.
Yeah,
Michigan.
yeah. Shut up.
King
Later,
and his
Matt.
comrades in Milwaukee played 3 organized games of baseball in 1859. In 1860, they organized the Milwaukee Baseball Club, but the outbreak of the Civil War drew many of the players away from home to fight in the Union Army. After the war's end in 1865, Milwaukee citizens organized the Cream City Baseball Club, an amateur club which played and practiced downtown on the former Civil War soldier training ground of Camp Guy.
That's awesome.
That's
also,
very
is
cool.
Milwaukee the cream city because of the beer? Like,
Yeah.
So even back in this
Well,
era?
and Dairy.
Okay, so I
Dairy,
was like,
yeah.
wait
It's a
a
dairy
minute.
state.
So are any of these organizations, these baseball clubs, the predecessors to the Brewers, or is that just so much later in time?
I don't.
Sounds-
I'm not really sure, but actually, the Brewers I thought were somewhere else first.
Oh, you know
we
what?
used to have.
Like, Matt, do you have an in-depth
the
take on
Braves.
this? The big sports fan that you
Yeah,
are?
not at all.
The Braves, I think, was the first Milwaukee team.
That's right.
And
That's
they
right.
went to Atlanta.
Because Hank Aaron played there.
Yeah.
I should have known that. That's like I've done 2 of those on this show this season where like baseball nuggets I should have known. Like you heard it in Andrew's episode, right? Like Ty Cobb.
Oh, right.
And I was
And
like,
said the
he
Dodgers,
said
yeah.
famous for whatever. And I was like, who played for the Dodgers? And we were all like, the Dodgers don't play in Detroit, dumbass. And I was like, yes. I should have known the Henry Aaron one. All right. Well, I love baseball stories. So thank you for coming on here. Can we all just
Absolutely.
agree that Abner Doubleday did not invent baseball?
Yes, we can
All
all
right,
agree with
thank
that.
you.
He
Yes.
would agree with that.
He would agree with that. Correct.
Because there's a lot of people that still don't get that, and it's a hill I'll die on forever. But so lots coming up. Melissa, thank you for joining us once again.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for bringing some humanity to the show. I know we have done a lot of bullets and bombs. We've done a lot of pirate fighting. We've done the Pennsylvania Reserves basically winning the Civil War by themselves. Like we've done a lot this
according to
year.
Eric.
According to Eric.
Nice.
And we've done a lot this year, but I'm excited for what we've done, and I am even more excited for what's ahead. And then we're still on the front side of looking at season 5. Like when you tune in December to our end of year episode, we're going to talk about some shakeups, some topics, some cool stuff. So Melissa, thank you for
Thank you.
being the way we ended the August offensive as we have turned it here.
Nice.
We did a July blitz and then an August offensive because we just, we want to hang out with you in the summer, people.
Yeah.
All right. Well, catch up with all of us on our social medias too. Not just the Battlefield Trust, but follow us, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube by searching for the History Things podcast. For those of you who are inclined to help the show, we have a special place in our hearts for you by sharing 5-star ratings and reviews on your favorite podcast apps. And for those of you who don't want to help, it's a special place in hell for you. We're getting ready for the Halloween episode, so you got to start, adding in the drama now. But no, yes, thank you. I don't even need to do it in post. We got Melissa here. So as always, you guys are the reason we've been able to do this thus far and continue to do it far into the future. So thank you. For our guest today, Melissa Winn, for our lovely co-host across me with the stunningly good hair today, Matt Borders. I'm your co-host, Pat McGuire. This has been the History Things podcast, saying we will catch you all later.
Have a good night.
You've been listening to the History Things podcast. Follow the guys on Facebook and Instagram at the History Things podcast for all the latest news and exclusives. Make sure to also follow Pat and Matt on their social medias at History Things with Pat and at Matt Borders Books. Have a question, comment, or compliment for the show? Send us an email at historythingspodcast@gmail.com. Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed the show.